Hello, everyone. I have Armunn and Zeal here with me. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, and then I'll take it away with the introduction.
Hello, everyone. This is Armunn.
Hello, all. This is Zealberg.
So, welcome, gentlemen. We convene today to examine the superhero phenomenon. Primarily, though, we'll branch off, and we're going to also look into initially as well the fall of Hollywood and this whole Rob Reiner thing and how it connects with Theosophy. Um, and so the superhero phenomenon is not merely it's not just a dominant cinematic genre within the West and of course the worldwide global pop culture, but it's also a synthetic contrived mythology engineered for a deracinated and atheistic Western population. So in the wake of the Nietzschean death of God and the subsequent collapse of organic ancestral grand narratives, a vacuum was created in the collective psyche. This void has been filled over the ensuing centuries with all manner of hyperstitional, corporate, industrial, complex, and synthetic identities that produces culture as a commodity rather than a communal organic growth, and of whom has established a synthetic smorgasbord of a modern superhero pantheon to soak up the extant spiritual energy in the target population that was once captured by the sponge of religion, and even previous to that, the community itself, the organic community. So Jean Baudrillard mentioned that the simulacrum is never that which conceals the truth, it is the truth that which conceals that there is none. The simulacrum is true. And so, for a deracinated population, one stripped of ancestral roots, local traditions, and coherent religious grand narratives, these corporate owned intellectual properties act as a hyperstitional engine. They function as fiction that makes themselves real, organizing the tribe's values, rituals, and even their sense of history around a commercial vacuum, a vector of the void. So, we're going to discuss, we'll initially discuss the fall of Hollywood, and I know you have some things to say upon that, Zeal.
Yeah, thanks for that intro there, Silas. I feel like I'm jumping into the ring with Mike Tyson after that intro. But anyway, yeah. So we just before we press record there, we had a quick chat there with yourself, myself, and Armunn, and the fall of Hollywood. You were talking about, the development of new mythologies and kind of synthetic mythologies, and like Hollywood is a kind of a synthetic. It's a it's a generating machine for synthetic mythologies and mythic characters and grandiose egos, and aberrant and abhorrent characters, and as such. But like, just to keep it topical, we recent case here of the murder of Rob Reiner. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Reiner. Rob Reiner. Rob Reiner was a big time Hollywood producer, and he would have worked on, back in the day, he worked on Spinal Tap, the movie, the music, kind of the rock band comedy mockumentary Spinal Tap. And he went on. Then he worked on When Harry Met Sally and a few other kind of big, like, blockbuster Hollywood movies, So he was a kind of he was an entity in Hollywood as such. But what happened was, the last week or two, he was murdered essentially, and his wife was murdered by his son Nick. So his son Nick Reiner murdered his parents, Rob Reiner and his mum, essentially. Now Nick, the son, is a guy who has suffered with drug addiction and homelessness in his life, and he's been in and out of prison, and I think he's been in and out of prison a few times. But he's definitely a guy that was very, he had a lot of challenges, a lot of challenging behavior, a lot of problems with addiction and whatnot. But as I've a kind of a passing interest in kind of true crime and stuff like that. So I've been kind of ish following the story, and just recently I looked at it again, and not to get too far off topic, but he had a celebrity lawyer that was due to represent Nick Reiner, a guy by the name of Jackson. And this lawyer is like a big time celebrity lawyer who's, he costs millions essentially. And to make a very long story short, the celebrity lawyer, the big time lawyer, just jumped off the case. He says, "I'm no longer representing my client. I'm gone. I'm out of here." He'll have to be represented by a public lawyer now, as such. The public lawyers are typically novice lawyers who are looking for experience. So his level of representation is a lot less powerful in the court as such. But anyway, I was kind of following this, and the reason, by the way, that Jackson jumped off the case is apparently his family have decided that they're not going to pay him. They're not going to pay Jackson the millions that he would have got to represent Nick, the son, who is, we assume at this point, is guilty of murder as such. So anyway, long story short, I was looking a bit at the case, and I kind of got curious and looked back along who is Rob Reiner, what's his background in Hollywood, and so I'm going to drag up this name here as I'm talking to you. So one kind of interesting resource is the actual the death certificates and the familial stuff. If you type in someone who's sort of in the media, and they've passed away, you can find out. I can't remember the name of the website. It's like it's a graveyard, like a burial type deal that details where people have passed away, but it also details their family, who came before them, sort of thing. So when I was looking into Rob, I came across his grandfather, who was a guy by the name of Henry Lebost, Lebost. And Henry Lebost, these people, by the way, are Ashkenazi Jews. And Henry Lebost was from New York, but Henry Lebost was a theosophist, and he was a big time fan of for those who are not familiar with, that's Helena Blavatsky, and that is sort of occultism central in the kind of in the 1800s, and it's probably tied into Kabbalah and Masonry and as such. Silas and Armunn are probably a bit better versed in that stuff if they want to talk about it. But long story short, Henry Lebost was a big fan of Annie Besant, and Annie Besant was tied in with Helena Blavatsky. Annie Besant was like a kind of a seer. She was a kind of a psychic, kind of seer, seance type person who was in communion with these supposed masters, old grand masters or ancient masters, who were giving wisdom and teachings to the likes of Blavatsky and co through the Theosophical Society. So anyway, the point being that as we've been kind of detailing in recent discussions over time, is that this power structure is essentially corrupt and essentially sort of falls in on top of itself eventually. So it kind of struck me that Nick Reiner, the crazed, addicted, sociopathic, schizophrenic, violent, murdering, murder his parents, is sort of the natural scion, the natural offspring of disorder. He is their kind of hero, their anti-hero. And when I read about Nick Reiner, I kind of realized what Silas had been saying was correct, is that this great endeavor eventually collapses in on top of itself, and it starts to self-destruct, because inherent in it is this seeming subjectivity around good and evil, that both paths are equal. And I don't know if Silas wants to kind of comment on that, if he feels that's an accurate summary of what we're looking at.
Well, no, the viewpoint in Kabbalah is the notion that all things are defined by their contrast. So therefore, the world itself is born of disillusion, and it's created vis-a-vis disillusion, or demarcation through negation, right, or chaos. So the F equals minus F. So effectively, this it leads us to believe that Kabbalah views the world as an extension of the void, and hence has to be run like a void engine if they want to persist into the ad infinitum.
But am I right in saying that morality itself it gets into, when you're looking at it through the Kabbalistic lens, or the Masonic lens, as it were, or even the lens of theosophy and such, that you get into a very boggy ground as to what is right and wrong, that it all becomes a matter of, it's just subjective as such. Am I right in saying that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, the view is remember, now this isn't necessarily that I don't necessarily disagree with them on the fundamental premise.
Mm.
It's just of course, they're evil, and I have goodwill for my fellow, fellow um, human beings, right? They do not. So the idea is that in metaphysics, you have the objective reality, but fundamentally you can never reach the objective reality, right? You can only know of the objective reality through the subjective, at the very most, a subjective consensus of what that universal is, right? So I was mentioning this to Armunn before you joined,
Mm.
synchronistically, and that's the idea that, for example, if we say there is a universal truth that the sky is blue, right? Of course, that the sky is blue I choose that because it's a question that goes beyond ideology. You don't need to be conditioned to know that the sky is blue, right? But in a way, you do in some sense, right? Let me state this case really quickly, and I'll let you continue on with your point.
Mm.
The idea is that um, if the sky is blue, yes, but that's a subjective consensus of reality because
Mm.
we view objective reality through our subjective mind. The universal truth is not us, but it's something we live within, right? So therefore, yes, the subjective consensus is the sky is blue, but fundamentally, how do we define blue? We can't. How do we define color? We can't. It's all subjective. It's just a consensus base, of
Yeah, yeah.
those subjective interpretations. So in this sense, yeah, absolutely, good and bad
But
don't
this,
really exist.
yeah, but this is the kind of point I'm kind of coming to, and this is like in the abstract, like how do I put this completely bluntly, like this subjectivity around good and evil stops when inside your front door, in your hallway, or in the corridor, or in your bedroom, your own son murders you. At that point, as the blade is entering you repeatedly, you suddenly realize that it's not that subjective at all. You want to live, you want to survive. So when you bring this entity inside the walls of your own home, you know what I mean? You very quickly, start to realize that there are pointed extremes in this, and near the twain or should ever meet. Do you know what I mean? So that's what I
Oh,
think.
no, I totally agree with you, but
Yeah.
this is the distinction when I use subjective to how they interpret. So they would
Yeah.
interpret. So absolutely, he wants to live, which is the subject. He is the subject of his reality. So it is a subjective sense that he wants to live. But subjectivity doesn't mean it's not. It doesn't have a semblance of truth to it, right? Of course,
No,
it's
I
changed by the
agree with you.
context, but
I agree with you. But what I'm trying to say
mhm,
is, maybe I didn't kind of, is you see, if this
yeah,
order sort of embarks on an absolute campaign of this moral subjectivity as such, right? That and they kind of philosophize it and kind of bring it into this kind of abstract removal of any sort of moral demarcation on things, right?
mhm,
And they're happy. This is kind of like art, murder might become an art, for example, because such is the nature of the beast, right? But all that stops. For example, it stopped for Rob Reiner when it happened inside the door of his own home.
yes,
So I agree with you in the sense that in the wider sort of I don't know what the word, epistemological or
yeah,
phenomenological or philosophical manner,
yeah,
yes, I completely agree with you. However, meanwhile, back at the ranch on planet Earth, you don't need that shit inside your front door.
no,
So
yeah,
this is the catch. And this is, why am I making the point? Well, the wider point is this is where they're going to get caught out. The structure, as it were, gets cut out inside their porch, inside their front door.
exactly.
It happened. It literally is going to occur, and that's why I thought that Nick Reiner, the son who murdered his father, is a sort of a kind of a prophet of this age in that sense, or a manifestation of that dark angel. that will eventually bring about the destruction of this order, because it happens from within. Their own offspring will kill them. And it's sort of a natural progression of this line of thinking. Like if you head into the subjective, if you put
It's
man as God, it eventually it implodes. It has to implode, and that is what Nick is. Nick Reiner is that embodiment of that. I think.
it's it's a traditional myth of the son overthrowing the father. For example, you have this in Hellenic mythology, right, where Uranus is attacked and defeated by Saturn or Kronos, and in turn he is defeated by Zeus. And I think that we can see this timing for this is extremely convenient, because this is a time for the toppling of Hollywood as the main machine,
Mm,
simply because it's no longer needed. And so, we can look at, and I agree with what you're saying in an organic sense.
mm,
However, we are witnessing a very intricate narrative that has been going on. And what we see, for example, we could say, for example, the 9/11 attacks were a consequence of America meddling into other people's business, right? And so they
mm,
meddled so much that they got, in their front porch, like you said, they got something really serious that went on. However, when we look and we see that uh, it seems more or less obvious that those towers were built with the idea that they were going to be demolished decades later. We can also make the same assumption for Hollywood, that Hollywood was built up to be this big machine that would propel culture in a certain direction, or certain several directions, but one main one. And that now that it's no longer needed, of course, it will be demolished, but it will be a controlled demolition. Of course, certainly in the narrative, in the same way that people that witnessed 9/11 within the narrative, it's very shocking, and it seems, a consequence of, previous action and so on and so forth, call it karma, whatever it is. But within the narrative, it serves a purpose of removing the old. Like when you demolish a building, you have to remove the building, remove the debris in order to construct a new one. But this doesn't mean that the old building was true or the new building is true either, right? So in this particular case, I think that we are in a time where Hollywood, and it has been a gradual slow death already, but Hollywood is ready to be completely removed from the scene, because you don't need actors. Basically, you will have still the ones that built their careers up to now. You will have them for a few years more, doing whatever they do. But you don't need actors. You don't need producers. You don't need all the staff that usually was involved in these productions. You don't need directors. And entertainment and the machine of culture will take a completely different form, as we've discussed in the conversation about the music industry, with AI, right? So
mm.
it is, in my opinion, a moment where the machine that was built was is being removed, because it's become obsolete. It's no
Yeah.
longer needed for the next phase. You
Well,
understand?
can I just come in there, because I sort of agree with you, but I have a kind of a condition on the agreement. If you'll at least entertain me for a second, and I agree with you. I think it's a shrewd observation that it is being demolished, and I think you're right, 100% on that, Armin. But I would put it to you that in its place, and this is the renewal. This is a kind of
Mhm.
core, kind of, again, it's a kind of a concept that's kind of linked in with Judaism itself. But this concept of renewal, you destroyed old Hollywood, but the new Hollywood, the producers, the directors, the screenwriters, the lighting people, the camera people, all migrate from Hollywood out onto the global stage, and they get jobs in propaganda. And instead of When Harry Met Sally, we now have, the fall of Venezuela. We get Maduro being abducted
Exactly.
instead of, Terminator 2. We get Trump, we get Epstein. We get all these characters. We get Maxwell. We What's the lady's name? Ghislaine Maxwell. We get these kinds of characters. That's the new Hollywood, and this ties in as well with. I think it ties in a little bit with that concept of hyperstition, where you're engineering this synthetic reality. Incidentally, I don't like to use that word hyperstition, because I think there is an element, as a footnote, there's an element of verbiage and rhetoric and hyperbole that's coming out of the likes of Warwick University. These are weaponized academics that we're quoting, we're using their language, but this is kind of pseudo intellectualism, and at its worst, I think the likes of what's the gentleman's name again, Silas? The lecturer that came up with the term from Warwick University. Can you think of his
Eh,
name? Off?
what term is
Nick,
that? Sorry.
Nick, isn't it? Or not Nick? Is it? He's got a kind of another one.
Oh,
Hyperstition.
Nick Land. Nick Land.
Yeah,
Yes.
Nicholas Land. Yeah. Anyway,
Mhm.
that's just an aside. Anyway, but the provision I wanted to make to Armunn, and I think this is an important point, is whereas I agree the destruction of the old, the birth of the new, but in Nick Rayner we see in this murder a kind of an unprescribed or an unmoderated artifact, something that has happened organically, that wasn't planned. It's not scripted. You have one of their own killing his own parents, and it's showing, I think, that there's this very, like, a self-destructive streak going through the whole thing, and there's a kind of, it's got a deep pit in it, and it's flawed and cracked, and I think
Mm.
that is the bit that's going to catch him in the long run. And I think that on a kind of on a much bigger scale, the son will murder the father. The son will murder the mother and the father
Well,
of this new age.
I agree entirely with you in regards to that replacement you were talking about. That
Mm,
Hollywood will transfer into what is considered a sort of reality TV, although it's not TV, but it's, it will be transformed into this wider stage. It leaves the cinema room and goes into the wider stage of world perception. Right? Absolutely agreed with that.
mm,
Regarding the organic or not nature of what happened, one thing that you could consider is this: is if something unexpected happened, you wouldn't know the story. He would have died of a heart attack. He would have died of a mugger that wanted to steal his wallet and stabbed him. The story would never have come out as if it was his son, because if there was a vested interest, if something unexpected happened, such as that, and there was this vested interest in the narrative, anything goes in that regard, right? The
mm,
narrative is the holy grail for these people. It's
yeah,
their source of power. So
yeah,
if it was, and this is the part where I disagree with you. If it was an organic thing, the son turned against his father, you wouldn't know. What you would know would be, oh, he died of, he fell off the stairs, or, some domestic accident, or, you know, shit would come up just to provide a story, and the narrative would try to adapt that removal, that unexpected removal, to keep its consistency. But what we
mm,
saw was exactly the opposite, was that to the four corners of the world, this case becomes a sort of OJ, right?
yeah,
A sort of public, because
yeah,
there's camps now, people saying that, yeah, the son should have received treatment,
yes,
or, this, because this public debate, when you see things molded around the public debate, that usually constructs a binary. of people taking
Yeah.
one side, people taking the other. And I mean, you already saw this sort of differently, of course, but you already saw this with that supposed murder of a CEO by that guy
Yeah.
Luigi something.
Yeah.
And it created this binary camps, right? The camps of, yeah, the CEOs are evil, they should be killed. We are with the guy that killed them, the murderer, or no, no, this is never acceptable, and we should condemn this guy. So when you see these camps defined in a very widespread debate, and of course extremely mediatic, I think you can rest assured that you are still watching the narrative. It's like when we discussed, regarding the music industry. If you make, I mean, let's say all three of us, we form a band and we start playing our music and the music we like and the things we enjoy, etc. Right?
Mm.
But it doesn't serve the purposes of the
Well,
narrative for the music industry. No one would see us. We would still do
okay.
the music, but no one would
L-
see us. Yeah.
let me come in because I agree with you in theory on the wider point you've made. I agree. However,
Mm.
I'm going to hold my point that in this case I'm going to stick to my guns. I have the sense that this was a bloody mess. It was unscripted and unplanned, and that's just my hunch on this one, Armin. However, I'll concede to you that you have a strong point, and you may actually be right. But I'm just going. My own personal gut is that this was totally unscripted. But I want to pick up on a kind of another point you made, or you're kind of in an area you were speaking of, because I was kind of just I was just watching the case in passing with not that much interest, but it began to take my interest. And I was thinking to myself, well, I remember Spinal Tap, because I used to like that movie, and we were all of us played in bands and whatnot back
Yeah,
in the
me
day, and
too.
most of us we've probably seen that movie and we're quoting it and whatnot, and it's a funny movie. And Rob Reiner, I think, is the guy making the mockumentary. He is the director in Spinal Tap, the original Spinal Tap. He plays the part, and as far as I know, he actually directed it as well. But anyway, notwithstanding, so I was kind of watching the narrative around the murder case or whatever. And next thing, who wades in? Only Donald Trump. And suddenly Donald Trump, in the middle of all this mix, starts making remarks about Rob Reiner, the late Rob Reiner. And he says that Rob Reiner he suffered from, what did he call it, anti-Trump syndrome or something, and he was
Mhm.
involved in this Russia, allegations that there was a collusion between the Trump camp and Russia, and I thought this was very curious, to be honest, because I was like, hold on a second here. This dude is a director in Hollywood. He's probably not even one of the big directors. He's just a director, and he's had a couple of blockbusters, but he's not like a Steven Spielberg, or he's not one of these. He's not one of the big heads in there. So why has Donald Trump? Why is he even bothering to open his mouth? And this is the point that I think you were making, Armin, is that the narrative, there was a chaotic moment in the narrative where I sensed that this murder was unplanned, happened, and it momentarily grabbed the spotlight. And the powers that be, the new directors, the new screenwriters, the new casting agents and the handlers told Mr. Trump, you need to wade in here and grab the spotlight back onto you. And you need to make some sort of a comment about this guy, or something that's going to grab the headlines. So he did. He waded in, and he made some kind of a, deeply insensitive, the usual stuff, deeply insensitive point about the man who had passed away, and cast aspersions on his character, and just was very untasteful, typical stuff. But I thought it was curious. And then a couple of days later, I discovered that Rob Reiner actually had done and I have yet to look into this. He'd either done a kind of an interview essentially with the former DCI director of the CIA, who is a guy by the name of Brennan, who's actually he's Irish American. I can't think, James Brennan, I believe, is his name. But Rob Reiner had done an interview. I could be wrong on that, but he's Brennan anyways, his surname. And then I was like, well, why the hell is this guy a Spinal Tap director? Why is he interviewing the head of the CIA? with regard to collusion. But and anyway, you step back from all of what I've discussed, and essentially, I end up agreeing with Armunn's point: is that you have a wider narrative that's been constructed. You have a dialectical, a division that's been sort of magnetized and polarized between, the Trump camp and the anti-Trump camp, and you've got, it's like Reds under the bed with McCarthy when the communists was talking about communists in America. Now it's the Russians are in. It's an echo of that. So anyway, just to make that point.
Well, I mean, I disagree with the organic part, but that's absolutely fine. We disagree on that. However, I would call your attention to something. I don't know if you remember. I don't know if Silas remember, because this I keep, I have to keep reminding myself that Silas is almost half my age. So I don't know if you watch these things, but you remember a documentary by a guy named, it was a Hollywood director as well, a guy named Aaron Russo.
Oh yeah, yes, yes, I
You know,
remember.
talking
Yep,
about the Rockefellers.
yep, yep.
And that is similar to what you were discussing now, Zeal, about a Hollywood director goes quote unquote rogue, starts talking about things that perhaps, digging up things that he shouldn't have. And Aaron Russo also died under mysterious circumstances. So this is, this is why I say that the pattern is so delineated that to me it is not random. But I have absolutely zero problems with that disagreement. It's a
Oh
merely a
well,
difference of point of view.
I agree with you generally. Like, like you see, this is the what's the wider question here? What's real and what's not real? And
Right.
there's a wider observation here, and it is, that's the flavor of the age we're in, where we've been deliberately, put into a place where we cannot, our situational awareness, our capacity to evaluate what we're seeing in front of us has been severely hampered by a blizzard of propaganda, lies, deception, etc., etc. And inevitably, when we do get like something like a murder happening under our noses, it's, the question mark is, did that actually happen or not? So I concede sort of where you're coming from. And there's no, it's just from what I can see from my vantage point, I think this is a legitimate, just a straight up murder, and I don't think it was scripted. I think actually what they're trying to do is to sort of cover it up, and not so much cover it up, but they're trying to absorb it
Integrated.
integrate
Yeah.
it exactly into other sort of existing narratives. But like I think it echoed in the chambers, as it were, because I think it's sort of awakened a self-awareness of the neurosis. And Rob Reiner
Mm.
he mentioned this point that he was neurotic. He's deeply neurotic. And I've heard this coming from a lot of interviews with people who are sort of well got in the Hollywood community, shall we say. Many of whom might be, they might be from Ashkenazi backgrounds, etc. They might be Jewish. But I keep hearing this thing of this neurosis. They're neurotic. And then there's this self-hating kind of thing. And the neurosis, I think, is at the center of all this. And I think Flight of Eros kind of mentioned it in one of his last discussions. He was talking about like fear, running from fear, and running from these negative emotions. And this is the neurosis, and it's the neurosis that sort of gives birth to all of what we're seeing in the modern world, I think. And
Oh,
it's uh, at the risk of being, at the risk of sort of treading into sensitive waters. You could argue that this is a deeply Jewish neurosis. It's or deeply maybe in the Ashkenazi community, but it's central in the Jewish psyche. Is this kind of irreconcilable, you know, polarity that's like a schism within their own minds, within their psyche, that is somehow,
It's
despite everything they've achieved, and despite all that they're going towards, and let's be quite honest about it here, they're the ones dragging us by the bootstraps into, the postmodern era, the technological era. But in the center of all that is this sort of neurotic complex of self doubt, self hate, fear, unresolved parts of the self. And I think that's where they've traipsed out into, into the cursed chair, and this kind of I don't know if has anyone comment on that.
Well,
Maybe
well,
I'm
well,
being.
It is a fact. Sorry.
oh no, sorry, jump in, Armin. Sorry, and I'll go.
No, I was going to say it is a fact that a mind character or a set of mind characters that have gone too far into following a shadow will become
Mm,
paranoid inevitably. So that part, of course, 100% agreed. The paranoia is something that you observe not only at the individual level, but at a collective level. For example, an institution, even a company, can become paranoid and increases its
yeah.
bureaucracy accordingly due to that paranoia of those that are in positions of prominence in those companies or institutions, whatever. So that part we absolutely agree. Another thing that has to be seen here is two aspects here. One is that we are in the part of the pattern, let's say, of the blueprint of history. We are now in the period of the fall of Rome. Okay,
Mm,
so we are now. Trump will be the last um, Caesar, let's say, of that Rome. Caesar, or if you want to consider the um, fall of the Republic and the beginning of the Empire, he will be the Julius Caesar, right? In the pattern in the blueprint, it depends on where in Rome we want to see. If we want to see
Yeah.
Rome as it was sacked by the Germanics, or if we want to see the beginning of the Empire of Rome. It depends. But we are now in that particular set of narrative, that particular part of the plot, let's say. Another thing that I think is another aspect that is important here is that I have been for I think a few years now, and I don't know if I've discussed this with you, Silas, previously in a previous conversation. I don't recall, but another aspect is that I think that the Jews will be given in the narrative as the scapegoat for all the evils of the old world. And this is also something, of course, that you see recursively in history. Whenever there's a catastrophe, there is a pogrom, right? And so and I'm not saying here that history is a fact. What I'm saying is that it's written there for a reason, and these cycles are written there for a reason. And I think that it would be quite an effective vent, an effective steam valve to present. Imagine a scenario like this. The old world is crumbling, and the new world is being proposed, right? And you have a sort of, type of Nuremberg trial, but instead of Nazis, you have, these people, the Jews related to Hollywood, the Jews related to banking, the Jews related to this, to that, and the other, that for decades now have been increased in the alternative narratives, right? And these narratives have been increased with a reason.
Yeah.
It is exactly to pinpoint, because it's not that they're not involved. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you pinpoint a specific group and say, this is the enemy. And you provide a scapegoat. You burn them metaphorically in the public space, right? And people can move on to the new world happily, hopefully, instead of, being having that discomfort or that distrust about the new world, right? Because the old world was already taken over. It's like, like I said, the period after World War II, when there was the Nuremberg trials, people went on to the new phase of the 20th century with hope, because the bad guys had all been removed. And how many times have we heard the expression, this is the war that will end all wars? And how many wars have there been since? Right? So I think honestly that these two factors are at play here. One is we are in the fall of Rome. And like I said, it depends on which part of the fall do you want to consider. I think it is the beginning of the empire, because the block of the empire that will make up Oceania in the 1984 geopolitical sense has to be formed. And another is that for that to happen, for that division to happen into these wider blocks, you have to offer in the public space one common enemy to all. And that common enemy has been, even now in the mainstream discussed as Israel.
Well,
Even now in the mainstream, sorry.
oh no, please finish your point. Sorry, man.
No, because when you see states, I think it was Spain was the last one, condemning Israel, or at least supporting Palestine, and we've seen several states do that, we know that this is a buildup for something, right? And I think that that will be for the public stoning or the public burning, whatever you want to call it. This is a metaphorical expression, to provide, the enemy was caught, the enemy was captured, the enemy was executed, and we can now move on happily and hand in hand to the new world that we are presenting.
Well, that's exactly what you see in the Zohar as well. So, I mean, see, when you look at all of it's not necessarily Jews per se, right? This isn't a genetic thing, of course. If it was, then I'd be partially complicit, right? But and I know you don't mean it like this, Seal, but just to provide sort of context
Well,
of this.
well, maybe I'd be complicit too. Am I not a Jew? I mean,
Well,
what's I'm Jewish. Can I
yeah,
say I'm Jewish? Like, it's
well,
totally subjective.
this
I
is the
mean, what's
thing,
the
yeah.
difference?
Yeah, there's very little there's so much ethnic distinction between Jews themselves. Then that really exactly what are they? But what they fundamentally are, if you look at it, what's unifying them is, yes, it's a civilizational viewpoint. It's a zeitgeist. I think the term would be like an urbild, right? It's like a primal image of how they view the world. And of course, this occurs again not on an individual basis, but amongst groups, even localities where they are. They view the world in a distinct way. They view the objective reality in a distinct way, a consensus. When you start to look at what we see apparent in terms of the development of the final like 500 years of this sort of Kabbalistic eschatology, which, yes, will eventually have the entire world, descending upon Jerusalem and Israel to do battle with it. That's the plan. This is the sort of insanity of it all. But the idea is that, in fact, uh, if you don't think of the Jews necessarily as one contiguous people, right? Nor are they, right, ethnically, as we just said. But think of it like any sort of societal institution. It's merely a mask. It's a mask to something else. So what you see, for example, with the likes of Rob Reiner, and you brought up quite correctly with Labost, and there's also another connection I just looked up there with Spiola, and she was also involved in sort of esotericism, but and they were involved in the family of the Reiners, but the idea is that all of them are from Frankist Sabbatean lines, and this traces back to Kabbalism. This also ties in with Theosophy, Masonry. I mean, you take your pick. So fundamentally, what you're seeing is not necessarily Jews per se. The Jews they're going to become the scapegoat of this. If this all fails, this little plan that they have, and believe me, we could go into how insane it is, because it really is insane. It's literally a death cult, and they're totally antinomial, meaning they are against the very natural order of things. in their most, in the deepest sense of their soul. That, and again, it's throughout history where you see the pogroms and all of that, and even the hatred you see now, the hatred is towards lower level Jews who are not complicit in this. It is fundamentally this sort of inner sanctum, the upper echelons, who are complicit. And by the way, they're complicit as well in the upper echelons of the Christian movements, and even the upper echelons of the so-called, Christian or deist republics or constitutional monarchies you see throughout the West, or any government really. They're all part, fundamentally, of these intermingling dynasties, and also these intermingling Frankish-Sabbatean or Kabbalistic threads, right? Fundamentally, when you get to that level, you are God. That is the belief. And what, for example, what you were seeing with Rob Reiner in that is every so often they have these sorts of transgressive rituals, right? And what you've got to remember, Reiner and the rest of them are very low down the totem pole. And they have these things because it's to keep that sort of class of entertainers, the jesters, it's to keep them in line, right? It's to sort of create this sort of transgressive cult where people both are connected vis-a-vis fear, but they're also connected vis-a-vis the very criminal enterprise in which they're complicit within. So this actually binds them together on a level that really I don't even think the modern man can imagine. And it is their belief, like what you see of the Frankish Sabbatean cults and even Kabbalah going all the way back to the likes of Simeon Simeon ben Yochai, who supposedly wrote the Zohar and the various Kabbalistic understandings and principles back in supposedly the 2nd century AD. The idea is that the power of love will overtake the world, but love to them is hatred for everyone else. So do you start? Are you getting what I was saying when I'm saying it's? Of course, you can look at this ontologically, like what you're mentioning. That's how I view it, right? And I can differentiate the two. I understand that there's things I don't understand about the world, the greater, profound truths, right? Nor can I actually, I can't absorb them into how I interact with people on a day-to-day basis. For them, that's not the case. How they interact with people on a day-to-day basis is absorbed into basically this paradox, this void engine. They are I think I've mentioned it to you before. They are literally children of the void. And just really, really quickly, you mentioned this really. I think it's a very profound thing, right? Oh, another thing. I'm going to act as the middleman here, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be organic, right? It could have been organic, but fundamentally, whether it was organic or not, how it is, like what you're saying, Armunn, integrated and reframed by the media itself is how we fundamentally view it, right? And it's how we fundamentally view even the subtle messaging within it. So the idea of the parasite of the mother and the father in this case, it's the parasite of the zeitgeist. I think you hinted at this, Zeal, and that is a very profound way of looking at it. And it's how I see it. I think it's a theurgy. So whether it's organic or not, again, it doesn't matter. So I was just thinking on it there when you guys were talking. So you have the death of the mother, right, and the father. But think of the mother as almost, it's like the mother is the studio. It's the chalice we all drink from, right? The womb in which reality is created, pop culture. And so it's the sort of nurturing dissemination of hyper reality of life as we know it from Hollywood, right? It is the holiness of the Hollywood name. And then you have the Father itself, which is the wood. It is the wand. It is the sort of authority figure that we see within Reiner, of course, right? So the death of the father is almost like the death of the binds of the story of the society, the death of the binds of the society itself, right? And so hence you have a death of Hollywood even in this. The Holly is
Yeah.
the motherly principle, and the wood is the fatherly principle.
Yeah.
And are you aware of Being Charlie, which is interesting?
Yes, this
Yeah.
is the documentary that Rob Reiner made, or not a documentary, it was a film, but it was loosely based upon his own experiences with his son. And I know, was it yourself recently? Somebody said that this Charlie name is cropping up again and again in various narratives. But anyway, go
Yes.
ahead.
No, absolutely. Well, yes. It basically, I was just looking up here. So, um, where is it here? I have it here. Oh, yes. Something else fundamentally to mention. Seeing a lot of alchemical notes in even
Yeah,
mythologies that are based on, of course, Renaissance alchemy. See the death of the mother and the father. That's actually
yeah,
what precedes the rebus or the divine hermaphrodite. I just wanted to chuck that in there.
mm,
Because I didn't hear it. But the yeah, Charlie. So it means It's similar to, of course, Frankenstein, the Frank, which is literally free man, and
yeah,
Charlemagne has the same etymological root. It's the free man. So it's almost like this constant death of freedom. You're seeing subtly, you know, introduced and interdicted into these narratives, right? But yeah, with Being Charlie, effectively, it's the idea um, that the son Charlie, right? Nick
mm,
Reiner in this case, that he is trying to escape and find himself and be the
yeah.
free man, be the Charlie, if you will, from his authoritative parent, which in this case is Rob Reiner, right? So it's almost in a private way autobiographical. And what you see in the Being Charlie is actually fundamentally a sort of failed alchemical marriage, which is what we actually saw in real life. So as Armunn would say, it's a sort of predictive programming. If I recall correctly, because I was just reading this a minute ago and I'm trying to find it now, but the plot is effectively that the son distances or he basically distances himself from his father and he becomes his own man. So in a way, he destroys his father in a metaphorical parasite, because of course the father is no longer the authority figure, and the mother, by extension, is no longer the sort of nurturing disseminator of what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is incorrect. So it's weird. And fundamentally as well, there's something else hidden in this. It was actually 9 years apart. So this was released in, yeah, May 6th, 2016. So there's 9 years between that and the death of Rob Reiner. So that is basically the nine-year cycle. And you see the nine crop up in loads of mythologies, of course, the Norse mythology. So it's the idea of the completion or the finality of a cycle, which also ties into your idea with the parasite of the Western or global zeitgeist as well. So yeah, that's we can also
But
mention that too.
just like on your point, and would say just to sort of strike a balance between, myself and Armin there, we had a bit of a discussion. Armin has sort of taken one side, and I took a different kind of view as to whether the event actually happened or not, or indeed happened the way we were told, right? Which is fair enough. But like the question I pose, it ties into kind of where you were going with this, Silas, is that a given event occurs. Let's just, for argument's sake, say we have a bunch of narratives that are synthetic. And in the middle of those synthetic narratives, reality occurs, a moment of reality, something unprescripted, unsynthetic, real, actually real and chaotic, unplanned happens, right? But how do the script writers, as it were, the globe who are now on the global stage, and the directors, as we have said, how do they incorporate the real event into the synthesis? And this is sorcery, this is chaos magic, and Silas has kind of embarked on a kind of display of it there, because he's already found the pattern, if you know what I mean. He said he's used Silas's spot right. There's a 9-year gap. and that echoes the cycles, as it were. And so now you're incorporating a real, actual event that was chaotic and unplanned into the understanding, the psychological framework for understanding the age we're in. So even though, and you said it earlier on, Silas, between what I and Armunn said, you said it doesn't matter if it actually happened or not. And I think you're right. You're right, and you've proven it there, because why it doesn't matter is you are still able, or one is able, or the power structure is able to incorporate that event into the narrative by way of a kind of the spell, the use of language, and the use of sort of pareidolia, or whatever's the correct term for sort of seeing the events in through that lens. And the event then, even though it may be real or not real, it still has the same net effect outcome as to bolstering
So
and kind of enhancing and
you see multiple layers. There's multiple facets to how this narrative um, sort of is how it integrates into one's subjective reality on a mass scale, right? So for them, what I just mentioned there is probably how they would see this. So
yeah,
you mentioned about neuroses, and
yeah.
there both Nick Land and there's another guy who's similar to Nick Land. I think he's a follower or a disciple, to use that terminology. Charles Johns, right? They had this
Mm,
idea that the neurosis is actually the freeing of the thought, the freeing of the thought. So the idea is it's the thought actually thinking itself, right? And this is why this explains why you have at the end of every civilizational loop like a breakdown of everything. Everyone becomes neurotic, meaning in its true traditional sense, its etymological sense, neuroses is the the abnormal nerve, quite literally. But in this case, it's the freeing thought, because you need the abnormal once everything has become abnormal, because to be abnormal to the abnormal is actually to be normal. So I'm not
mhm.
necessarily saying what Nick Reiner did was normal. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is on a
No,
larger
but
scale, there's an
I
out
have to
there.
interject. You've made
Yeah,
an important point, and I'm sorry, really sorry to cut across you, but you made a kind of a key resonant point there that it's important that I jump in, because in an interview, right, in an earlier interview, Nick Reiner stated that the reason he became a drug addict was because he had no identity. That this is his own words. So he decided, his father was like, he came from a family of famous, talented sort of directors, screen people, film people, and here he was, this, in his own estimation, a nothing burger. So he took on this persona of the drug addict to be an extreme, to be a something rather than be a nothing. So it echoes exactly what you said there, that the neurosis. How did you say it again? It was
well, Nick Land mentions it as the freeing of the thought, or quite literally the thought thinking
yeah.
itself in the vacuum, or in a vacuum. So it's Um, this is probably ties in with Armun's mind characters as well, and even the shadow, right? So the idea is that uh, effectively the way that the higher ups view reality is actually through a sort of ontological neurosis, which they actually induce into the civilization and the system. Because remember, they're not just controlling people; they're controlling their own subjective reality, trying to maintain themselves upon the path, and to ensure that
Mm,
entropy doesn't decay how they view reality, and thus decay them from their sort of path of maintaining the hyper reality as they have it. So they would view things like this, these absolutely what we would call, evil acts, absolutely maligned
yeah.
pursuits. They view that as the work of the gods. This is what I'm trying to say. It's for them.
Yeah,
It's
but
how they
not
control their
not
psychology. And
when it threatens their existence. Do you know what I mean?
yes, but
Like,
Rob
Rob
Rein.
Reiner abandoned, for let's just for the argument again, Rob Reiner presumably, let's just for a second assume he himself had that position, this subjective position with regard to morality. But at the point his son is murdering him, once that subjectivity, the manifestation of that threatens his own existence, his life, he's going, hang on a minute. Do you know, there's the irony of it, like that it's
If
not a concept without limits. It has limits. Once it doesn't threaten me personally, I'm okay with a subjective morality
if
kind of
if
thing, you know?
we assume that Rob Reiner's dead, right? Let's just assume
Yeah.
that it actually happened. Then
Right.
what you find on these lower levels of, I guess you would call it, let's just call it Kabbalism, right? For lack of a better term.
Mm,
Rob Reiner isn't in the inner sanctum. We see Rob Reiner, he's merely another mask. It's a
mm-hmm.
mask that's generally visible. So for that class themselves are not in power. They may have an inkling, a very, very, very ignorant inkling of what
Mm,
this is about. But Rob Reiner, what they're provided for is provided for through, for example, even being Charlie, that was provided to them through the Writers Guild. They are actually more
mm,
powerful, I guess, in a sense, than the directors and what have you. They are unseen in Hollywood, largely. And then beyond them are the commissioners of the writings. And you're starting to get to, you know, deeper levels. So effectively what I'm mentioning is this, it's a compartmentalized structure. Rob Reiner is a peon in it, right? And it's done in such a way that the rest of the Hollywood clique, they know there's something wrong, but they'll just put it down to, you know, neurotic behavior in a largely changing culture. That's how the other actors would view it. Now that's not meaning to say that these actors aren't involved in transgressive rituals. I mean, for example, look at the actress out of Smallville. She was running a satanic sex cult, for instance, right? But you know, even the satanic sex cult, that itself is very, very low down. These are transgressive rituals that become more and more and more transgressive the further you get up the, you know, the totem pole, right? And the transgression themselves, those are initiatory rites. Those are things for initiation. So the actors can go through it, but they don't have to understand it. It doesn't really matter. It's like Kabbalah, the Eleusinian mysteries. Let's take that in ancient Greece. The nobility went through that. They had, you know, a prepackaged understanding that was fed to them of the initiation. They were basically drugged out of their ever loving mind. And then they were brought down into the catacombs and they saw a vision of the divine feminine, the divine mother behind all of reality, the grand soul of the architect. And, you know, they thought they were actually witnessing the divine. So this is how Kabbalah actually controls. This is how initiatory rites and the mystery religions control the upper echelons of a society as well. Do you have any comments to make upon that, Armin?
Yeah, well, undoubtedly, it is compartmentalized, as you said. Undoubtedly, these people that appear in front of our cameras, they know what to act in a very uh, contained manner. They don't go off script. And there is another aspect. You know, recently, it's a pity that this guy only has AI videos, but recently I've explored the videos of a channel called History Hacking. And I've actually invited him to be on my prognosis, but there was no response so far. Unfortunately, he only makes AI videos. I don't know if it's because his English is not good. I know he's German or Austrian or something like that. And he pointed out something that really caught my eye, and I think I mentioned it to you, Silas, which was the marker in history. And he treats history as a fabrication, right? And he sees that from time to time there are markers that signify for that narrative that it's time to implement the next phase, to start the new cycle, whatever, cycles within cycles. So one of the things that stabbings, for example, is a marker of is the mark of the fall of an empire or a republic. In this case, for Rome, wasn't an empire, but after the stabbing of Julius Caesar became one. But it's the fall of this state of grace of a big nation, if you want to call it, right, a big um, kingdom, and this repeated several times in Roman history at regular intervals in the narrative. And it seems like if that's why I pointed out the importance of being during the administration of Trump, because Trump represents either Caesar or the last of the emperors, but I think he's Caesar, right?
I agree. Yeah.
He is the guy that um, wants to end the republic effectively, and because it would be far more stable if it was an empire. And so during his time, something as mediatic as this of multiple stabbing, and if we recall what is written about the stabbing of Julius Caesar was multiple stabbings, where all the conspirators got one at least, right? Um, to me, it's like a marker signifying for the actors that only know their cues to implement the next phase. So what you can imagine a compartmentalized movie set where you don't know, none of the actors there read the whole script. But all you're told is, okay, you sit in this corner here and you do your thing. When you see this or you hear that, you do your lines, you do your scripted moves, you appear and you do, what is your script to do. So I'm also wondering, if of course the something as dramatic as this involving a stabbing isn't to signify the next stage of the theater play, again without the actors needing to know the whole script, right? This could very well be a marker in the narrative that signifies the fall of the Caesar eventually, of course, you know. So
I
when
think.
we look at, yeah, sorry,
Oh no, please finish your point.
no, go ahead, I was more or less finished.
I think you're totally on point there. And remember as well when Julius Caesar was stabbed to death, of course, in the Senate by that conspiracy. Right after, sorry, right before he was about to uh, set off on an invasion of Parthia, which was the Arsacid Empire, the Arsacid dynasty of what was at that time Persia. In fact, the Parthians were a Persian or no, sorry, an Iranian peoples, right? So effectively, they were Iran in the ancient uh, ancient days. Pardon. So
Mhm.
you're seeing that as well, and of course we have America trying to threaten Iran constantly, and they're
Yeah.
Trump is talking
Mhm.
about this invasion of Iran. So you see the same exact. It literally is a blueprint that is repeating itself. Even the aesthetics of the American Republic was they were fashioned for the reason solely because, of course, it ties in with the Zohar, right? We are all Rome supposedly to them, so therefore we're fair game for the eschatological conflagration at the end. But it's the idea that America had to become the new Rome, had to wear the vestments of a ghost, uh, because it's part of a theurgical ritual.
And of course, the eagle, the American eagle, is the Roman eagle, for all intents and purposes, right? So um, it's and of course the like you said, the aesthetics, the buildings, the way all those Roman columns in all these state buildings and so on and so forth. Of course, it serves that purpose. And the period of time that we are now in the narrative seems to be signaling, with all these. I mean, we have Trump enacting what he enacted in Venezuela, and talking as he has been talking about Denmark, about Greenland. This is, of course, to sort of build up what seems more or less inevitable, right? Which is a sort of palace coup. But what comes next is not the saving of the republic, if there was any republic to be saved, right? But what comes next is the bloc, is the empire, right? Because to rescue a dying republic, you have to implement the Iron Hand, because of all the factions that would emerge and so on and so forth. So I think, yes, that the narrative, and of course, one day, the scapegoat of all of this will be, Jews in general, but particularly in the image of Israel. And of course, again, to say what you already stated, it's not like every single Jew, because not every single Jew is even an Israeli or
Yeah.
a Zionist
Yeah.
by any means. So, but it's the image. We're talking about public image. We're talking about the image within the narrative. Right? And so the image within the narrative is, like you've stated, it was written in the Zohar that everyone will attack Israel and so on and so forth, because that has been built up to be the figure of this, world. If for the Christians it would be Antichrist, for the Muslims it would be Shaitan, right, or Iblis, right? Whatever, in whatever culture, you will always find something of that. And when all the evil, this common evil for all, has been eradicated, you will see people hand in hand, because it will be a very public thing, sort of, it could take the shape of a Nuremberg trial. I'm speculating here, but something very public, that people will hold hands and walk gladly, hopefully, and joyfully into the
Yeah.
new world.
Oh no, absolutely. Well, the reason that they have Trump right now is because he is going to vilify nationalism as we know it. And he will be the final Caesar of nationalism. Then you will have, like what you're saying, the supranational super blocks, and after that you'll have. So it's like what you're saying, Zeal. The reason he's bringing out the whole Rob Reiner thing and vilifying him is because there's a subsection of the well, I say a subsection, about basically half of the population and growing are against him. They're against the sort of Gestapo ICE tactics, right? Which is that's what it's designed to do. It's designed to put people off the idea of, securing one's borders, for instance, right? And this nationalistic tenet. Moreover, as well, even the idea of him invading Greenland, which, by the way, contravenes a 1917 um, act that was signed, a treaty that was signed between Denmark and America, that stated that, firstly, America wouldn't use military personnel to attack Greenland. That they stated that if they wanted to buy Greenland off Denmark, it had to first the UK had to first put in a purchase, and then that had to be denied, and then America could buy it. And then it mentioned a few other things, right? But that was when they gave over the what was it, the Virgin Islands, right? The U.S. Virgin Islands, I believe. So the idea is that this contravenes everything, right? It makes the US look like a pariah state. It actually serves no purpose, because fundamentally the US already has effective free reign over not just Greenland but the entirety of Europe, right? We are, of course, I'm in Scotland, Zeal's in Ireland, Armunn's in Portugal. All of us are part of the American Empire because all of us host American military bases, at least one or two in our countries. So fundamentally, America already has free reign militarily over all of this. This doesn't make sense. It only makes sense if you're trying to turn Trump into a Caesar figure, a figurehead, for this vilification of nationalism, which will pave the way for the supranationalism. Another one, by the way, is this sort of poking of the bear, the Russian bear. I mean, they've just taken out the Bella 1, and now supposedly Russia have said, basically back off, right? This is the narrative. Back off, or we'll sink one of your ships, America, and we'll give you a click on the nose, right? And in response, the Americans aggressively have pursued another 4 of these tankers, right? So the idea is, here's the hilarity of it. The Americans, God bless them, right? And I'm not saying, I'm sort of generalizing here because I have to. There's 350 million Americans, but if you're an American watching this, I'm not referring to you, but if you go on Twitter, there's a lot of Americans that are just like total hubristic sentiments. Like, Denmark needs us, Europe needs us, we will, what are they going to do? We can wipe them out. So they're becoming blinded by nationalism, which is of course what all of these identities are meaning to produce.
It is the purpose. It is the purpose. It is to you have to take something to an extreme in order to, what is a caricature, right? A caricature is you bring the traits of something to an extreme and make it ridiculous,
Yes,
right?
yes.
If someone has, I don't know, big ears like Prince, oh no, now he's king, right? King Charles, right? Oh, you can't. We can't make fun of state figures. I forgot about. Sorry about that. So,
Yeah.
if someone had big ears, a caricature of them would have to include humongous ears, right? So it is the same. Sorry.
Oh, sorry,
Sorry
what's
there.
that?
Sorry. So apologies.
Ah, okay. So it's the same thing here. Of course, you pick up the traits of nationalism and you extend it to the most extreme, ridiculous, sense to make it a caricature. It is exactly that. And of course, people will look at that caricature, and those that still hold on to it will be ridiculed down the drain by the rest of the consequences of that, seen in the narrative. And those who held on until then will see, wait a second, this is a cartoon. I'm
Yeah.
not going along with this.
It was do
Of
you
course.
know, hilarious? The hilarious thing about this, of course. Now, take the reality of this with a pinch of salt. But in my first book, and I'm very well versed in Roman history, right? Just find it interesting. But similarly, I find a lot of lore of video games interesting, right? All of these things are just stories to me, narratives. So, but with Rome, you saw the same thing. Literally, Rome thought it was by itself, just the city of Rome was indestructible. They thought it would go on for it. It was their military might, it was indestructible. And I never thought it would be that quick after me in the first book stating that I thought Trump was either going to be a proto Caesar figure or a Caesar figure. I didn't think, and I even mentioned as well the evacuation of Afghanistan. It says eventually, as you see with Rome, they got more and more hubristic the more that their territory started to shrink, their sphere of influence started to shrink, right? They lost Dacia, for example, in the 2nd century AD. So they were actually finding everything, their territory was shrinking. And at the same time, they were getting more hubristic. They were believing no, it's not going to happen. It's like they were in denial. It's not going to happen. We're we're going to hold on forever. And it's the same. It literally is. It's a replay. It's a repeat moment by moment of the collapse of Rome. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know how else to. It's so utterly bewildering to me because it's like Rome sped up. Where this would have taken maybe 40 years in the supposed timeline of the Roman Empire, it's literally taking, you know, 5 years. Well, what's it been? 5 years since I released, yeah, pretty much bang on 5 years since I released the first book. So I was writing it in 2020, so almost 6 years. And you're seeing this mass, um, you know, just it's yeah, it's like people are. It's like we were saying, people are internalizing the caricature. I don't even think they're
Yeah.
conscious of it. It's quite
No,
crazy.
that's exactly it. That's exactly it. It is a caricature on purpose, and it is by no means an accident of history, or by no means that Trump is associated with the nation that he is, right? And that everyone is starting around the world to see, wait a second, is this the USA, or is it Israel too, right? Or Israel one, if you like. So it is exactly to cause the caricature, but also to, with one swoop, you remove all sides of this. And the only side that is left is this new world that everyone will want. That is what they desire, is that everyone will willingly, voluntarily want to go to the new world, happily, joyfully, holding hands. You know,
It's
because
like
all
the
the
new.
rest is in ruins behind them.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yes. It's the
agreed.
new. Yeah. Yeah. Could we? Well, we'll get on to some of the superhero questions as well, just in
Yeah,
terms
yeah,
of the
go ahead. Sorry, man.
synthetic mythology as well. Um, but absolutely, I mean I can't agree. I can't agree more. It's yeah, absolute. And again, I just want to preface and stress, it's not unique in the American, imperial. It's not unique in the American sense, right? In the American, with the American character, we also went through something similar right here in Britain, where this idea, literally, we're about 10 years away from the empire collapse. And of course, the Irish had thrown us out. And we're about 10 years away from maybe the 1950s and the Mau Mau rebellion and decolonization. That was when we were at our most hubristic, where we were, chanting effectively and living by the mantra that the sun will never set on the British Empire. And then 10 years later, the thing bloody imploded, right? They had to give it up. Well, they had to give up because there was ulterior motives. So, but on the ground level with the population, we were hyper hubris. We were snobbish. We looked down our nose at everyone else. In fact, it's still extant today, right? And you see the same thing with I would say the Americans. It's for me as
Were
a
you
Brit, it's quite crazy. But um,
were you at the time also singing Jerusalem?
we were yes, yes, yeah. Funnily enough, so was America recently with the COVID thing. They were singing that song Jerusalema, you know.
Yeah. Oh,
So
that's a
yeah,
different. Yeah.
it's quite interesting. At the end of civilizations and empires, they sing the Jerusalem song. Yeah, it's interesting. But
Well,
um,
that was a British Empire song, wasn't it? As
it
far as
was,
I can
yeah.
tell.
No, it was to make Jerusalem within this green and pleasant land. I
Yeah.
will not
Right.
stop until I make Jerusalem in this green and pleasant land. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That was part of
Mhm.
it. Yeah. So on the surrogate pantheon, if this is a question for both of you, if the nation state is a hijacked family unit, as we've mentioned, are superhero cinematic universes the hijacked religious unit? In an atheistic society, how do these multiverses serve as a top-down, standardized replacement for organic folk myth and local legends?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if I can go on first, I would say that part of organic living within with other people, so men with other men, groups of people that voluntarily group up together, is a key aspect to that is admiration, right? There is someone that organically does something really well, and you admire them for it, and it, in a sense, it mythologizes within the group, which is actually organic and healthy, because it's a form of recognition and of that individual that has those skills of doing something really well, that is um, surpasses that of the rest of the group, to also teach and convey as much as he can those skills to the other members, so that it can perpetuate, right? And again, we go into the idea that art, like we discussed in that previous conversation, I don't know if it will be released by the time this one comes out, where we discussed that art has a temporal aspect to it, because it tries to perpetuate a moment, right? And in this sense, it's a form of art to mythologize the admiration, right? Now, mythologize, trying to perpetuate it. Now, what is being done within the worldview, within the world stage, is exactly, like you said, a surrogate mythology. It is, okay, we generate voodoo dolls for you to admire, considering that organic need and that identification with the admiration of something spectacular. But these idols have nothing spectacular to offer per se, right? I mean, you can admire, I don't know, if you're on the intellectual side, you can admire Stephen Hawking from here to eternity. But you know that voodoo doll that was presented had nothing to offer you. This was entirely a built up, it created that idea of the wheelchair super mind, like that guy from I think it's the X-Men or whatever, uh Xavier, isn't it?
Yeah, Charles
um
Xavier.
right, that there was in a wheelchair and so on. And so these are in the sphere of the worldview, those idols to be admired, so that you don't pay attention to those that you would organically admire, and those that you would organically learn from, and that you would want to learn from, right? So someone would perhaps, um, you know, uh, um, spend all their energy and all their attention and all their time venerating uh, an idol, be it from Hollywood, from the political sphere, from whatever field that is given to them, when perhaps the quote unquote teacher that they needed was right next door all the time, and they never paid attention, and they never saw, and they never allowed that teacher to cross their path. It's that saying about, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Yeah, but the student has to be ready. Right? And if the student um, spends their lives looking at this fantasy, they will never see the actual quote unquote superpowers of those that are already among them, right? And that brings us next, just to finish my point here, to the Marvel movies and this kind of thing, because that is a caricature exactly of what I'm saying here, right? Because you have in these diverse universes of superheroes, you have archetypes, and some of them even, I mean, blatantly archetypes that we can identify with for that reason. I mean, when you see Thor, Thor is an absolute archetype straight out of mythology, right? So they fill a need, an organic need for admiration that we have, and that is perfectly healthy, but it's skewed in a completely grotesque and unhealthy manner. And people therefore waste their lives, their time, their vitality, worshiping at the altar of these idols, when, you know, in the organic world there are people, there are actual superheroes in the sense of a comparative thing that would be willing to teach them if they were ready. So that was my initial point. I'll let Seal.
Yeah. No, just following on from your point, you use the word admiration there, like, and this relates to, the worship of the deities of the new mythology, as it were. So, if one asks the question, well, why does one admire? Well, one admires because one sees a character and the endeavors of that character as resonating with one's own um, ideals, or one's own values. But I'll make the point. You go back to monotheism, Akhenaten and Aten coming into Adonai, and so on and so forth. Like, I've heard it said that the old mythology, where there was multiple sort of gods and goddesses, after that was destroyed and replaced with monotheism, that was the birth of neurosis. Because in the old pantheon of gods, all these different entities represented man's psyche, or some aspect of man's psyche. His darkest hour, his most heroic moment, his hopes, fears, all of it, reason, madness, all of it was represented in the pantheon. So, for whatever sort of situation man found himself in, he had a god or a goddess or an entity, or he had a story, a narrative, or a mythos that he could relate to, and he could resonate with, and he was arguably in a healthier psychological state and spiritual state, as it were. However, with monotheism, all of that was sort of done away with. So, so to use this word that Armunn said, what does one admire now? Well, before we answer that, let's look at the individual. Where is the individual who admires? Well, the individual has been brought up with monotheism. They're arguably in a kind of a naturally neurotic state. They're within neurosis because of, well, one aspect of it is monotheism, which has arguably given birth to the neuroses, and there's several other strands of the web of modernity that leading into this neurotic state. So then you to answer the question, well, who are the new, where's the new mythology? Well, the new mythology is owned, by Warner Brothers. It's owned by DC Marvel Comics. It's owned by the people who make the computer games. It's owned by the people who make soap operas on daytime TV shows. And it's owned by the psychological warfare people. It's owned by Mrs. Good, who is the poet, redheaded white woman who was shot by the ICE agents. She's a hero, even though she's coming from psychological warfare, narrative, and propaganda. Yet she's a social hero in this neurotic, you know, edifice of this fake reality that we find ourselves surrounded by. So this is the new mythos. That's the new pantheon, as it were, the new our new heroes, our new Fionn McCool, are basically being hoisted up in front of us by the directors, screenwriters of psychological warfare, military intelligence, and mass deception. So I don't know if that would be an angle I take on it.
I absolutely totally agree with you. Basically, monotheism was the first sort of great hijacking of, for example, what we see with nationalism. Nationalism was this amalgamation of all of these smaller organic identities into this one large amalgam, and in doing so, you basically made it meaningless, right? So you entered a state of, with, for example, Akhenaten, the many became the one, and through that, it fundamentally rewired the human psyche, and it basically created the first type of psychic totalitarianism, which would have been redeveloped and reinvented with the same sort of kernel that you saw with monotheism within, for example, nationalism, later on supranationalism, as we're seeing this nascent stages of now, and then the global citizen identity. You also absolutely, there was a sort of polytheistic flow to one's life with the pantheons, and these things, they were something of a measured, anthropomorphized, we have to be clear about that, sense of the elements or the archetypal qualities of one's own soul. But to basically turn all of the many into the one, that only, it didn't serve the individual at all, because the individual was left confused. And he was left confused about monotheism to such a degree that the only way of course, the controllers who monotheism served through this centralization, the only way they could maintain monotheism within the minds of humanity was effectively to keep them in a perpetual guilt complex, or to keep them in a sort of anxiety state, right? And the anxiety itself was produced due to the exclusion of this sort of panoply of the distinct and differentiating and multitudinous qualities of one's own soul. So effectively, what you found was a sort of trauma bonding that went on with monotheism, and it was a trauma of the one. This is why Akhenaten, you brought up Atonism. That's why he destroyed and shut down all other temples. We saw the same thing with the Hyksos, of course, with their almost monotheistic worship of Set. They shut down all worship of Amun, who was the chief deity, but all of the other deities were also attacked as well. So, yeah, as Akhenaten positioned himself as, he was the son of the sun. So it's, for him, Aten wasn't the Amun, it wasn't the hidden essence of the sun. It wasn't that thing we couldn't measure, and we were in awe of, just as a sort of vitalizing aspect of our lives. It was something that we saw. It was the material disc. So all you see is what you get, and everything just becomes bland and boring, and all of this notion. But that's an absolutely brilliant point. Yeah, and you're seeing the same thing, aren't you? Really, with what we were mentioning with the surrogate pantheon. Here's something else to ask as well. We've already sort of answered it, but just to get some really quick points off you guys. So I wrote here. So of course we've discussed this idea of the nation, right, being a sort of undead force or an egregore. So I think Armunn's answered this, but superheroes then function as modern tulpas. They are egregores. They are basically psychic projections that the population feeds their energy into, thereby preventing them from engaging in their own organic tribal development. So it's a hyperstition. But do you see, tying this in with monotheism, do you see all of these sort of vehicles of neuroses in society? Do you see it as producing stagnancy and a sort of stasis, as a means of course, projecting and perpetuating power?
Yeah, I think it is producing stagnancy, but it's also producing something worse than stagnancy, which is a kind of atrophication of the social psyche. It's like rotting. There's a rot setting in, like a kind of a canker, a gangrene setting into the social mind, because like that's the logical. It's like a cancer. Like it starts with as you use your word, stasis or inaction or a paralysis of the will. And like a paralysis of the will is sort of a social depression. So if the society was a patient on the couch in front of us and we were saying, well, how can we help this person, or where is this person at? We'd say they're in a sort of a chronic state of depression, and the long term sort of outlook isn't good, because as the patient sort of descends further and further into this depression, their self starts to sort of detach and kind of come apart and implode and break into pieces. Like, so there's a fragmenting. So what you have is with these you know, not just the superheroes, there's a whole multitude of signs and symbols, as it were, and kind of edifices that are in turn involved in creating this condition of our patient. One of them being these, as you say, these manufactured kind of corporate superhero entities, be they, Charlie, whatever his name is, Kirk, or be it our singer, the lady we were speaking about. What's her name again? We spoke about her
Taylor
last week.
Taylor
Taylor, our
Swift.
friend Taylor Swift, or our best friends in on who are all on our side, Joseph Rogan, and what's our man in England on the far right, the guy leading all who's
Oh, Tom, Tommy
Thomas
Robinson.
Robinson. Sorry, Tom. I insist on calling them their formal first names. Thomas Robinson, Joseph Rogan, William Gates, who's our hero, kind of billionaire, achiever, winner. So all of them are sort of have stunned us and have they're feeding our depression. Really, they're feeding our inaction, and our inaction is in turn starting to feed our we're actually in a healthier state to be neurotic than we are depressed, if you will, because within neurosis is a kind of an anxiety. It's a kind of a shrill, aggressive form of anxiety where we're chasing ourselves all the time. But once that peters out, once that sandstorm dies down, we're then left in a depression, which is a kind of a death state. So that's actually as bad as bad as it is even less is worse than the neurosis. But this is the decay that's kind of setting in, and
Yeah.
it's the hand of the sorcerer at work, and we're just under the spell. So
Yeah, during decades, the individual has been removed out of the psyche, right?
mm,
And when I say the individual, it's not at a lower level, but the higher level of individuality that I keep talking about and
mm,
trying to convey. Um, and with that vacuum, leaving behind that empty shell, merely, functioning in automatic, through automatic scripts or automatic routines, automatic beliefs. Um, you know, the whole set that we are indoctrinated with, not only
mm,
formally but informally as well. Of course, that anything that can be identified with this, because there's this longing with the vacuum, there's this longing in the individual that he doesn't understand for something that he lost, right?
yeah,
Something that he left behind, and he doesn't really understand. And people, okay, some go rebel against the world, but then go to nationalism, thinking that that is the truth. And because if this is false, the other one must have been true. This there's this logical fallacy that kicks in. But other people that don't even realize the bullshit in the world, let's say, gravitate to these extraordinary caricatures. And like you said, it can be, someone who gets shot is a
mm,
hero.
mm,
Someone who gets shot just by being there is a hero, right?
mm-hmm,
And this is, of course, it's not a hero, it's actually a martyr. But martyrs are a
mm,
hero too, and that's something that monotheism brought very well. Right? And so there's this. I think that there's this idea to cause the identification with the things that were left behind due to the programming. So you introduce programming in that vacuum that you've removed, right? And these people will continue on having this longing. And so to fill that longing, of course, they produce these, be it fantastic, be it politics, be it martyrs in news reports, be it whatever it is, to fill in, and people identify with that because of what they left behind. And as soon as people understand that what they left behind cannot be recovered through the screen, it can't be recovered through the screen. It can't be recovered through the internet in the sense of,
Yeah.
reading articles or whatever, or scrolling through X, whatever it is, right?
Mm,
When they understand that what they left behind can only be recovered in actual organic life,
mm.
that is when things for the individual start to change.
Exactly.
But absolutely agreed with what both of you have said before.
There's something else I want to mention, and you brought it up. You mentioned monotheism, Armin, that they've made the martyr into the hero. That's a very interesting point. But you know what else we can also tie in with monotheism is, for example, with Akhenaten and Atonism, he basically made Nefertiti and his wife and his basically his biological family. They became the literal temple of the one of the Aten, and thus Atonism tied sort of spiritual salvation to bloodlines themselves. And funnily enough, you sort of see this even in Christianity and some sort of offshoot Christian sects with even the likes of Dan Brown's, the idea of the priory of Sion and the bloodline of Jesus and all of it. So the idea is there's power in the blood, and you even see this in Christianity too. So that's another thing they also tied in with all of this, and this is why you see dynasties being so reverential within this sort of cult-like structure of the mystery religions, and this is why you see the chosen family as well. This is why you
And
see the
and
royal
also,
family. Mhm.
just a parenthesis there, a quick parenthesis, because that also links with theosophy. Because theosophy promotes the idea that the ascended masters incarnate to guide, right? And of
Yeah.
course, that can also be seen in Buddhism. I mean,
Yeah.
especially the Tibetan branch, with the bodhisattvas, and because bodhisattva in Tibetan Buddhism is different from the bodhisattva in Theravada, but that's an argument that is not for here. But that the superhero of the ascended master that incarnates, comes to planet Earth to help, um, uh, translates, let's say, into the political and historical fields as what you've described. Sorry about the interruption.
No, absolutely. I totally agree. And here's another question for you guys. So we brought up Taylor Swift, right? And so do you see? So of course, this is the superhero films themselves are part of the culture creation machine. But just as Taylor Swift is, the sort of the last monocultural star, as we described her as the last time, and of course with her mono song, this sort of formulaic 32 bar uh, uh, structure that uses the same chords, so on and so forth. Do we see the Marvel thing, and even the DC films too? Is that the last sort of outgrowths of the monoculture? And even, for example, the sort of corporate administrative monomyth that the liberal order, let's just call it that for lack of a better term, is itself, perfect. That even if there's evil and corruption, you have these sort of fictitious caricatures of social justice and the sort of postmodern hero of the superhero, that they will come along and save the day. What are your guys' opinions upon that?
Well, if I may, I just make a quick point on that, right? That the superhero, for example, the Marvel superhero, sort of in the archetype was this hero that had these powers. They had supernatural powers, right? Like Superman or Spider-Man or any of these people had kind of they could feats of strength, or they could see through steel or fly through the air or whatever. They had these like magical kind of. And this ties in really with I think this is Masonic. There's an element of masonry in this because as we talked about Ryan earlier on, I was looking a little bit into into theosophy, and for some reason I ended up wondering about William Butler Yeats, the Irish poet, Anglo-Irish poet rather, very much Anglo-Irish, and he, by the way, I don't think he'd be in Ireland but for Oliver Cromwell. But anyway, that's a totally different story. But anyway, I had wondered actually if Yeats was a Freemason himself. He was a member of the Order of the Golden Dawn, and Silas might know a little bit more about that than I don't know much about it. But as far as I know, to my own limited understanding, the Order of the Golden Dawn is essentially Freemasonry to the likes of me, or it's
Yeah,
Kabbalism to the likes of
it's
me.
yeah,
Essentially, in short,
yeah,
I know it's
sure, yeah,
probably offshoot, or there's different variations or whatever. But for the working man like myself, it's essentially masonry under a different name. However, as I was reading a little bit about Yeats, he had a poem where he used this term, the winding stair, and I came across this article which said that it started talking about the winding stair featuring in one of the lectures on Freemasonry that neophytes in Masonry are given this lecture, and they're taught about um, this concept of the winding stair. And I'll hone in now on the point about these superpowers. Like, what's these Superman, and as in the question that Silas asked, what's at the center of all of this, right, is the new religion must be married with science. It must be married with science. And this is a Masonic, as I understand it, a very Masonic ambition in the great work. And it's also a very Steinerian ambition. And when William Butler Yeats was speaking about the winding stair, the winding stair really has to do with entering, I think it's called the second temple, or the central temple, or some second room. It'll come to me in a second, but the point being that one is on a trajectory of learning in Freemasonry. One, first of all, must overcome the five senses of the body, as it were, of the physical. And after one does, one ascends into a new level, and one then starts to study and incorporate the sciences like geometry, um, astronomy, I believe astrology, etc., language, music, and rhetoric. Actually, is what we're doing right now. Rhetoric is a part of that. The capacity to express one's inner feeling and thoughts through language. But anyway, to kind of hone in on my final on the point, the Superman, or the super like the Marvel character, Superman, Spider-Man, these kinds of people, science has kind of married in with their humane essence, and they have this superhuman ability which only science can bring to us. So this is a narrative that has been sewn into us kind of subconsciously through the exposure to this these corporate these corporate characters, which they are essentially corporate, from DC, Marvel, and such, Warner Brothers and such. And similarly, then, Silas, you alluded to the corporate world itself. The superhuman feats of success in the corporate world, um, Bill Gates and co. All these characters, arguably have utilized technology and science to kind of make the leap into success. But
yeah,
notwithstanding, I'd make the final point that at the center of all this is the marriage between science and religion, or science and human essence, and that's at the
Absolutely
center
agree.
of the whole ambition, I think.
Absolutely agree. I would say even more. It's not per se a marriage. It is transforming religion with the face, with the mask of science. Of course,
Yeah.
there is real science behind it, and there is real science to be discovered and to be known. But the idea was to transform the mask of religion from mysticism into science. Wearing the mask
Yeah.
of science. We
Yeah.
absolutely agree. Absolutely, and the rituals you've described are exactly with that intention. Absolutely.
I was
Um,
gonna. Oh, sorry, Armin, please.
No, I was just going to say that I have to go shortly, so go ahead, Silas, but I can't stay much longer.
Oh, no problem, man. There's something I was going to mention really quickly, Zeal, and then we'll probably try and get another question. I don't know how you're looking for time, Zeal. How are you for time?
I can stay on for another short while, not too
Yeah,
long, but I'll
yeah.
stay on for a little bit. Yeah.
All right, no problem. So, well, yeah. Um, there was something I was going to mention really quickly on that, and it was something I was actually going to include in my writing to you. But the idea of the second degree has that winding stair, right? It's the second degree is the fellow craft degree, and the winding stair effectively consists of 15 steps. This is what you see if the ladder leading up. You sometimes see on Masonic iconography leading to the east, and the east
Yeah.
obviously is actually vertical. Thus, it's the north. This also ties in with the Ophiacian cycle, the one that, of course, me and Flight of Eros were speaking of. But the idea is that so it's divided into 3, 5, and 7. There's a reason for that. I won't go into all of it, but it leads to the middle chamber within
The
King
Middle Temple.
Solomon's temple. Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
within Yates, of course, was in the Golden Dawn. I believe he was
Yeah.
probably affiliated with the Masons with some right. Perhaps not the Blue Lodge, but who knows?
Yeah.
He actually took the motto of Daemon est Deus inversus, and moreover as well regarding the Second Order of the Golden Dawn, which was a similar idea. It was focused on the internal temple, similar to the middle chamber of the King Solomon's temple, and that Golden Dawn motto for that second order or second degree ritual was Rose Rubia et Aurea Crucis. I'll go into what these mean, but effectively, this actually, you posted a picture to me of Thur Balili,
That's
the
right.
tower. That
Yes.
tower is the literal winding stair. You could think of it like a battery, right? That's what it is. The sort of tower idea is also linked with that too. Um, so that's where you would effectively attempt to manifest anima mundi, which is the world soul, so that you can control it, almost as you can control the spine of the axis mundi of one's column. Um, so yeah, in the
Well,
three
I have
five
to stop you
seven,
there, man. I have to
yeah,
just stop you on that now because you've come out with a few clangers there, and they're flying like, and I need to just kind of pick your brains on that, right? What do you mean? What does it mean, like, to manifest the animal? Because I've been very curious about that tower. For anyone who's still listening, basically William Butler Yeats was a well-known Irish poet, kind of world famous, and he purchased a tower, literally a castle, in just outside Gort. I think it's County Galway. As Silas mentioned there, Tour Ballylee, uh, T- Tor, which I think is an old Gaelic word for tower. But so I was actually out there not so long ago at this tower, and it's down a winding kind of country road, and you come to this very picturesque, which I understand is a Norman tower, of which there are many, many dotted across the countryside in Ireland when Ireland was essentially being colonized by various waves of invaders, including, the Normans, the English, as it were, and many, many more. So, point number one was to find safe sanctitude and establish a castle so that you could defend yourself, presumably from the local Irish who were going to be attacking you until you established your nation or your empire proper. But anyway, to come to the point, What do you mean, size? Can you expand a bit on that to manifest what you said in just there? Like, are you on
Mhm.
about a kind of a spiritual, like an actual entity, or what? What do you mean?
Well, it was exactly what is Daemon est Deus inversus. So basically, that's Latin for it. The
What
demon
does it mean?
is is the reflex or the inverse of God. So the idea is that you actually create, because the world is created vis-a-vis disillusion, chaos, negation, to thus recreate it in the image that you desire. Because remember, man is the deconstruction of God in Kabbalah. So thus, to reconstruct it, to construct this tower, if you will, the axis mundi, and you have to understand the anima mundi, which is the soul of the world, and the soul of the world is inversion to them. It's the void. So fundamentally, what this is why you also engage on a metaphysical level with transgressive rituals. Pardon, pure rituals of transgression. It's for example, parricide, right? Like what we saw with Rob Reiner. And
Yeah.
so what this produces is a sort of inner order within oneself where they view themselves as the Deus, and they view themselves as the demon. So they view themselves effectively as both the devil and God contained in a synthesis. So they become
Mm.
almost the cosmic petri dish for this grand war of the gods, or the theomachy, right? And then when you start to view yourself as that, you become a law unto yourself. You basically realize that you yourself, um, of all the power of the universe itself, right? So it effectively is putting you in a state of mind where you have climbed the tower, so to say, right? You have wrested power from the dead God. You have found a solution to Nietzsche's sort of antagonisms of the death of God, right? Because you have become God in and of yourself. Well, of course, he even states this with the Rose Rubae et Aurea Crucis, the idea that the red rose, basically the red rose and the cross of gold. Remember Rob Reiner, Rose
Yeah.
Rubae? That's literally the second order is also titled as an acronym RR8AC. So Rob Reiner, Rose Rubae, right? Et ore crucis, so the red rose and the cross of gold. And the idea about that is it's the Rosicrucian cross. So what the Rosicrucian cross is, and the reason it's called the Rosy Cross, is the rose is a placeholder color for that which exists as the eighth point in the eighth layer beyond that of the magenta, which is the blue and the red, the judgment and the mercy combined into a singularity. And what the rose is, it's the placeholder color, is it's this ineffable ein, this nothingness, this void. So fundamentally, what they're doing is it's actually similar to I think we mentioned it several discussions ago. Basically, they are Voldemort. They are the flight of death. They're seeking to escape the shell of the world. And the only way to do that is, they believe, for them to mature from the spiritual embryonic stage through darkness and transgression and the full totality of experience, be it good, bad, or indifferent, until you become mature enough to break free from that egg, from the containment, from the confinement of the world, and you become in and of yourself what man was destined to be in their opinion, which is God. So yeah, that's pretty much what it all means. This is also why you see a lot of these rituals of the grave. For example, me and Armunn were in Sintra, and they have the initiation well, and at the bottom of the initiation well is this same cross, the sort of literally the rosy cross. Sorry, the red rose on the cross of gold. But in that sense, it's the not the cross of gold, it's just a red cross. It's the same idea. You see this with the Templars as well. And the way that the cross is set out is basically a hidden 8 red star. The reason it's 8 is because it's pointing to this rosy placeholder color beyond the 7th chakra or the 7th layer. So the idea is that for you to ascend, you have to descend. So this is why they kill people en masse and do all of this terribleness. That's their belief. I know it's insane. That's what they believe. When you start reaching up to the higher levels of any of these secret societies, not that I know directly, but from what I've read, I'm almost 95% sure they will tell you that you are God and that everything they've told you isn't real. And effectively, it was all just to sort of give you a bump steer, to test you, to see if you were, you were right. And then when you get to the inner sanctum, they tell you basically, yeah, God and all of that it's fiction. You are God. That's what they. Not that I believe that, but that's what they state. So that's exactly what he was doing. I'm looking up the tour. That would make sense because in Doric, that's how they say tower. Funnily enough, I've
Can
heard
I
that
just
quite a lot.
reverse you a little bit there?
Yeah.
You can you repeat there? You said Yates, the what kind of statement he took for himself, or some sort of a thing
Yes.
around death. Can you repeat that again? It was
Well,
like Latin or
the demon is the daemon es deus inversus, or quite literally, the devil is God inverted, or the demon is the reflex of God.
and
So
who is that? Did Yates use that as a kind of
yeah, that was his personal motto.
his personal motto?
That was the personal motto that he took when he joined the Golden Dawn.
Jesus, I don't know that. Because
So
I'd be very, very curious. Like, I know I've been in a few other similar tower houses around Clare.
mhm.
As I said, there's many of them around Ireland, like of that, that typically of that type of tower, But I'd be 99% sure there is an actual winding stair within the tower, within
Oh
the
yeah.
tower itself.
Oh, undoubtedly. And that's how they were
And
all designed.
yeah, and they, as far as I know, most of those winding stairs, they're stone, and they literally wind around a central,
Yes.
like a
Axis
column as
Mundi.
such, like
Yeah.
a spine, as it were, and they turn to the left, as far as I know. Trying to think now, as they turn to the whole idea is that if you're being attacked and someone's trying to come up the stairs, they
Yes.
can't wield their sword properly, they can't swing,
Yeah.
and that's one of the reasons for it. But I would be very curious to know if the Golden Dawn ever met in that tower, or if Maud gone, or if there was any ever occult rituals, or indeed if there is. What did we call it? Sorry, a central chamber. What's it called again in
Well,
the
it's called the middle chamber of the
middle,
Temple of
rather,
Solomon.
middle chamber? So, the middle chamber, as it were, is after the 5 steps or the 9 steps, or
So the way that the way that the temple of so the way the second degree is set up in the fellowcraft, from my recollection, is that there's 15 steps on the
mm,
winding stair, right, so to say.
mm,
Um, it goes 357. The reason for that is because they're all odd numbers. If I recall correctly from my notes here, yeah, that's what I thought. So there's a distinction to this. If you see it in certain, only in Scottish Rite, I believe, where these 357 are typically depicted and illustrated as females. So the reason for that is the sort of exoteric view of it is that it's faith, charity, and I forget the final one. But really,
charity.
fundamentally, what they are is it's the Trinity. It's literally the trimorphic protonoia.
Yeah,
It's what me and Kazumbo were actually speaking of in several discussions ago. And so what this is how reality is. It's how the metaphysical structure of reality is. So, as I was saying to Kazumbo, effectively what you're seeing is the alpha, the omega, and the idea. This is why you have in the Abraxas stones IAO. So the idea, which is Greek for thought, quite literally. So the thought itself produces the differentiation within the origin point and the end simultaneously. So simultaneously, the idea produces those two and exists between the two formless states within a temporal stasis. So the idea is that the formless origin and the formless dissolution at the end are both terminal, meaning they're of the end, right? They're formless, they're of nothingness, they're of the pre-Genesis state. They are themselves. How could I describe this? They're basically the end is the beginning and the beginning is the end. So they're reflections, and we exist in the midst of that reflection. So the two formless pillars, if you will, for us give us form by their contrast, right? So this is how they function. It's how they basically bring their entire fiat currency system into view, for example, or social dialectics or anything like that. And the 357 is basically the spirit, the spirit, the mind, the body. That's the 3 steps. The 5 steps is that of the God, the orders of architecture. What are they again? It's like the human senses and sort of like the Geist, right? It's basically your inframing of reality itself, right? Subjective reality. And then the 7 steps at the top is that of basically the 7 planets, the 7 Apkallu, the 7 guardians, and also the stages of alchemical purification and purgation. So fundamentally, what you're seeing here is a trinity within a trinity within a trinity. So that idea. Another thing to mention as well is that yes, here we go. So the idea. Remember, we were talking about this with Flight of Eros, and the idea is that so you have this Ophiachian cycle. It goes from the serpent's cauda, which is the worm, which infiltrates the ground, the chthonic realms, which is exactly what Yeats and the rest of them are doing within their initiations. They die and then they're resurrected. All religions start with this as well, all mystery religions as well. So you die, then you're resurrected. There's a sort of descent into the grave with the expectation that you will ascend. So you become the worm, which is the Yaldabaoth, right? It's why the Yaldabaoth is the lion-headed worm, or serpent as well. So you enter, you eat this soil, and then of course through the waste that you produce the roots of the tree, right? This is what the worm does. So therefore you create, as Flight of Eros mentions, the lacuna, which is the negative space, and the negative space is the generative space, because darkness is generative in this sense. So the darkness itself is where your potentiality will shine, because in the darkness the light is more easily discerned. And then from there, you enter the Ophiachian bowel, right? You, like what I was mentioning, you go through all of that waste until the Ophiachus turns his head to the east, and the serpent emerges from his bell or his bowel from the waste, not as a worm, but as a fully fledged serpent in its own right, aware of who he is in the grand scheme of things, the Axis Mundi himself, right, like what you're saying, the column, and also with the Anima Mundi, the spirit of the world, and both of them are in an equilibrium state. And then he goes to the east, and he's taken up to the north, which is the void, which is, of course, the idea is that he's crowned with the corona borealis, the northern crown. He eats and devours the 7 stars. The eastern star eats and devours the 7 stars from the north, as it says in the Zohar. The idea is effectively is that you realize that the world, that you are an aberrant thought, a bit like Mark Twain's Mysterious Stranger, and you realize within your aberrancy as a mere thought, drifting amidst the void of potentiality that's been fractured and discharged through, of course, your thought, your sensation of thought. You yourself are actually God incarnate, and you can do anything. And you, by the perceptual vehicle of the thought and inducing thoughts into both your own mind and other people's minds, you can recreate reality from the ground up, like a tower. And then, of course, combine heaven and earth, because effectively that's what you've done metaphysically. So you might as well do it physically through, I don't know, digital technologies or what have you. So that's the belief. That's the belief. And you can pretty much look through every mystery religion known to man, and that's the same recurring belief in a succinct format.
Yeah, I'm my jaw's on the floor after what you just said there, man. It's like, fuck, man, that was just. I don't know. You've some mind, man, to take all that in and to absorb that stuff. It's like, it's fair, serious stuff, man. Serious. Like, is the tower then? Is the tower itself a sort of a symbol of the recreated reality by man?
Yeah. Yes.
So is that
I,
what the tower is? It's essentially man's.
it's the physical idol or symbol to. It's almost like, if you had an achievement, you would commission like I don't know, let's say a trophy. That's exactly what it is. So it's almost the trophy of their metaphysical freeing
So
of themselves.
you don't think it's any accident then that Yeats chose a tower?
Oh God, no. Yeats actually, for all of his brilliance and his literary work, I mean, the fact that he chose a tower has to be the most banal thing I've ever seen when it comes to the mystery religions. You know, of all the things you could choose, you choose a
Yeah.
tower, which is, about
Which,
as cliche as it comes. Yeah,
yeah, okay, it's I get you. It's cliche for the insiders. Like it's like,
yeah.
yeah, and
Well,
it
yeah.
I assume it has a winding stair. I assume it probably does. Most of those, as I said, most of those towers do have. You know.
Oh yeah, almost definitely. Here's another tower symbol. So I've actually got to send you some of the serial killing notes and well, ritualistic killings in Indianapolis, which is the middle point between the I-70. So if 70 is of importance in Kabbalah and mystery religions, just due to, of course, the 70 nations within the Old Testament and all of that carries on. But the so the I-70 goes from west to east. It goes from Utah, which interestingly, its etymology is Judah, which is very close to Judea, interestingly. But it goes from there all the way to that of Maryland. But interestingly, if you were to overlay, so firstly, all the deaths were happening in Indianapolis, which is the center point, which is where Ophiuchus would be, between the serpent's cauda of Utah or Judah and that of, the serpent reborn, and that of serpent's caput, which would be in Maryland. Pardon me. So funnily enough, if you were to overlay the Ophiuchus with the serpent's cauda, serpent's caput, and then you were to overlay the Corona Borealis would be exactly where New York is. And what happened in New York? Well, what happened in New York is you had Ground Zero, which is where the Zero Order was learned in a sort of physical way. The two towers were collapsed. They created two voids where the water creates this endless return and endless stream into the void, the cubic void, on both the north and the south tower. And that's also important as well, north and south. And then they created a one world tower, which of course shows the metaphysical unity of them, like what Yeats was doing when he bought this Tour Ballali. And from those towers, you have two blue. Each tower, you have two blue. At night, you have two blue. What would you call them? Sort of high energy or high voltage lights that go into
Mm,
the sky. Why blue? Because if you look at the Sanskrit term for blue, It
Yeah.
literally means, from its etymology, the glow or the hue, or just in general, the color of Saturn. So blue has always been the color of Saturn. Why Saturn? Because Saturn himself is them. It is them. Reason Saturn is them because Saturn ate his own children. He did the most grotesque and transgressive thing to try and escape the prophecy of that time would devour time, that power would devour power, right? That the macrocosm would devour the microcosm. So it's this endless escape for them, trying to escape death through the exacting of death into the world. I mean, you literally couldn't make this up. It's so
I
insane
remember
on so many levels, but it's yeah.
just on the blue thing. I remember Flight of Eros. He'd some discussion about the Hindu the gods in Hinduism were depicted as with blue skin essentially. So does that
Yeah.
relate? Is that a Saturnine? Like, is that somehow related to Saturn as well, or
It's somewhat. It basically, the reason they have blue skin is the primary reason for it is beyond the mythology, just the pure symbolism, is that blue. Um, it also appears in the Norse mythos, Vitblin, which is literally
yeah,
translates as the wide blue. But the way that blue is discussed in the Norse mythos and most of the Indo-European languages is that it's synonymous with black or dark blue, which is the color, of course, of space or the void. So the wide blue itself is this idea of the fathomless depths of potentiality. It's like well, in fact, the Vidblin is part of Gimli, which is the high heavens. So beyond Asgard, you have the high heavens, right? Even beyond
it's the
Ginnungagap,
color
I
of the
believe.
sky.
It's the
It's
color
the
of the
color of the
sky.
sky.
It's endless.
The endless,
This
and the
idea of
sky is the
endless.
heavens, and so it's is that
Yeah.
that must be one of the reasons I suppose for it really that
Yes.
and didn't the Celts when they were going into battle or we used was it woad they called it or
Wood, yeah. And here's another
it
thing.
was a
You were
blue
talking about Irish occultism.
yeah
See Montpellier's Hill. And I'll send
yeah
you the notes on this. Of course, that was renamed by the Hellfire, the
the
Freemasonic
Hellfire Club
Grand Lodge of Ireland, and all of that
yeah
set up that and bought it over. I forget his name now. He was a sort of high up
mm,
Anglo-Norman politician, Anglo-Irish
yeah
politician at the time.
yeah
That Montpelier Hill was renamed, but actually it had an old Gaelic name, which I believe meant Woad Mountain.
ah
So basically the reason, well, of course, woad doesn't. I don't think woad grows in Ireland. I'm not sure, but um, anyway, the woad, the woad color itself, that blue color, yes, it was a sort of magical, heavenly color. The idea was is that they covered themselves in it, and that it would deflect arrows and all of this. Um,
yeah
it's because it's heavenly. Absolutely, absolutely on
mm.
point.
And just
Yeah.
to go back a little bit to Yeats again, this Order of the Golden Dawn is it, do you know is that a uniquely Irish order as such, or was it in the UK and Scotland, or is it a unique? Is it unique to here,
Um,
or do you know?
No, I think it was I think it was founded in London, if I recall correctly. I don't
Mm,
recall who founded it now, but um, yeah, it was the idea of the Golden Dawn is this same notion that you see in the end of the Splendor Solace, which is the Red Dawn, and the Red
mm,
Dawn is that which comes right. It basically proceeds. Of course, it's part of the four alchemical stages in the general sense, where you have putrefaction, blackness, and then you
yeah,
have albedo, the whiteness, the
yeah,
citrinitas, which is the yellowing, and then the rubeda, which is the red dawn or the reddening. So the idea of the red dawn is that which it's like the vibrancy of resurrection or revivification after the
yeah,
destruction of the previous world age within the sort
yeah,
of black sun or the soul Niger. So the note
yeah,
that is what the golden dawn means. The golden dawn, remember, it rises from the east. So you have to head to the east
yeah,
through the waste of the Ophiachian bowel to thus come from a
yeah,
worm, an initiate, into the fellow craft, then into the worshipful master, and then you're crowned by the corona borealis if you're seen fit enough, by the void, right, or the
Mm.
dweller in the abyss.
So
Yeah.
you come through the Negredo in just in summary again, and then you have the Red Dawn, which is like the new birth, as it were.
Yes.
The fetus or the infant, entering the world is red as such, like screaming red. And then after that, you have the Golden Dawn, which is like the new eternity, as it were,
No,
the eternal Reich, the new.
the Golden Dawn and the Red Dawn are effectively synonymous. So
Ah,
it's
okay, okay,
it's the
okay.
same idea of the resurrect, the continue, basically the endless, eternal return of time. This idea
And
that
can you give
just
us a simplified understanding of this continual mention of East, its importance in
yeah.
regard to masonry or the alchemical, or what, in a simplified version, what is the symbol?
Well,
Why
the
does it seem to pop up?
the simplified version is that the East is associated with the rising of the dawn. So
Okay.
to thus understand, and basically this goes back to all religions known to man, whether they do it directly or not. I mean, even Christianity does this. They worship the dawn at its resurrection, right? I mean, Christ is
Mm,
literally the
mm,
son, the son of the son, the son of man. He is
mm,
the resurrected son at the dawn. He is this idea of
mm,
eternal life. He even talks about it. So the notion is, but by the way, here's another one. So I've just looked up here. The Tour Balali comes from Balulo or Balili, which is Irish for literally the son of the calf, or sorry, the tower of the
mm.
home of the sun, or the tower of the home of the calf. That also goes back
Yeah,
to Marduk or Amaru or Amarutu, which means bull calf of the sun god. So he,
yeah.
or Krishna, is another idea with this. So the notion is that it's the eternal return, right? That is the eastward
Mm,
goal. But there's a hidden aspect to that, where if you follow the east, right, the widow's son follows the east, that he will, well, firstly, he follows the west, he goes into evolution, and then goes to the east to reconstruct God, repair God, that idea, that he can reach the north, which is the notion of the void, which is where the
mm.
constellation Draco is, and Aquarius, and all of this.
Yeah.
So it's the idea that, so the Golden Dawn, if you were to think of it, is the grand architect. It's that thing that just keeps the cycle going, right?
Mm,
Through his own differentiation, epoch after epoch. But the North is that which basically finds the sort of escape, if you will, from all of this. And this is why they're trying to create
mm,
the digital space. What
mm,
people need to realize is when these people enter their Homo Deus biodigital convergence, this is what they believe. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but this is what they appear to believe, is that they will kill themselves, quite literally. So it won't even be figurative in their rituals now. They will kill themselves and they will be reborn into the machine, right? Whatever that may be, the Internet of all things, the cyberspace. So the idea with digitalism in the data centers and the black cube, and this is why they don't care if they soak up all the water in the world and make it undrinkable and destroy all of mankind to pursue this fever dream of, the
mm,
digital rebirth of mankind in cyberspace, because ultimately they're trying to find an escape from time itself. So the way to do that is they realize that you can only figuratively reach the void, right, by, these rituals. But if you could actually physically create cyberspace, right, you could go inward, right? You could descend into cyberspace, and by doing so, you actually ascend northward, if you will, right? You become a god in and of yourself, which is that's the symbolism of that. I hope that answers your question. Um, so
Yeah,
so
and
the idea
just
is, yeah,
as I have you on the hop there, like this concept of them literally killing themselves, like
yeah.
not to ask too pointed a question, but is that true? Have you reached that conclusion through your own studies, or is that something that
Oh
you've
yeah. No, Harari mentions
read
it
or
directly. He says
okay?
we will do this. He's not talking about himself. He says the elites are likely to do this, including he's talking about himself as well. He says we are likely to do this, even if we will pursue it, the Internet of all things and all of this, even if it kills us. Even if it kills us. I'll get the quote for you from I think it's in Homo
Yeah.
Deus. He mentions that there will be the Homo sapiens which will be obsolete, and in the Homo Deus, which are the God men, the Adam Kadmon, quite literally, or the Rebus, whatever, they will become the living gods tied to the oracular machine of the Internet of all things, which will be
Well, how will they, if they were to go through with that? Like, how would they ensure their, how do I say it? Like, how do they transcend death, as it were?
well. This gets into even what digital machinery and technology is. Think about it, right? It's very similar to what Solomon was talking about. Even if you look at the sigils that Solomon was using in, for example, the Goetia, or well, supposedly he was using them, using the lesser keys of Solomon. Um, what you're finding there is, in fact, it's geometric patterns that affect energy, right? The energy that's charged
Mm.
into the symbols. So effectively, it's frequency which regulates the energy, and the energy itself comes from the heavens, so to say. So the idea is, right, the way that we generally create technology is that we take, I think it's I forget the primary thing that we use for circuitries, but there's a whole plethora of metals and minerals that we use. We break them down, we fashion them into sigils, quite literally. These sigils that I was talking about in the Goetia, we charge them with the energy of the heavens, lightning, and then we force the thing to think on our behalf. Now, that's the primitive version. But imagine if you could, through some sort of, technological theurgy, right? Let's just call it that, because it's unknown to us right now. But they're eventually wanting to get to that point where you could kill yourself, right? And by doing so, you embody that sigil with your own energy or your own power, or you transport yourself through the energy, the energetic current, your consciousness into that, right? However that may be. You're carried forth into the sigil. You're bound to it. And thus you're bound to the universe, the metaverse that they create. And here's one thing as well, lastly, is that um, fundamentally, right, um, this God, I've just lost my train of thought there. Sorry, please. I've just lost my train of thought. Sorry.
No, you were talking there about like we asked you a whopper of a question, like how will they transcend death, and you were kind of, you were talking about the geometric symbol as being sort of,
Oh
you know,
yes,
a way to contain
yes,
the energy, as it were. And then you mentioned, you know, that somehow they could use the, effectively, the symbol, or the you know, the geometry to transmute themselves into, you know, the I suppose the zeros and ones, as it were, or into through the field. But it's kind of what you're hinting at is a digital soul. That, like, you
yeah.
know, we've heard this concept, the digital twin. You know, we've heard that one where the, you know, there's up on the server there somewhere is a version of us that's a kind of hypothetical model, as it were. But kind of what you're hinting at is the creation of a digital soul, that each one of us, or, you know, that the powers that be will be able to create
That
a
that's
mirror of their
that's
own
the I
soul.
that's the idea. But there's something else I was going to mention. So right, think about it. Right, with the dream, and there was something I wrote yesterday, and it was a bit of an epiphany that I had. And in fact, it was based on the discussion I was having with Kazumbo. And if I just find this very quickly, guys, I do apologize. Just before, I don't want to keep you too long, but it was. Yeah, God, where is it? is an absolute whopper of an epiphany. Yeah, so if you think of this notion that I mentioned, that there's two formless states, the alpha and the omega, the formless beginning and the formless dissolution at the end, and that is what informs the form of the temporal stasis in between, right? The sine wave and all of that. Now, think about it. If the idea of the dream, one way to escape temporality and the effects of entropy and time is not to ascend, it's not to try and build a tower and ascend into the heavens, or even figuratively and metaphysically, conquer the heavens. And no, if you want to do it physically, you descend and you into the world, right? You create these sigils, these data centers, where you effectively establish a metaverse, a virtual universe, right? Because effectively
Mm,
what you're creating is a Wachowskian honeycomb, like what we see in the
mm,
Matrix, right? Where you're effectively creating another dream state where you, in this dream state, let's just assume it's a dream state, you are effectively pouring your essence into. So
mm,
this explains how universes come into being, firstly, and it explains, moreover, as well. Again, I'm not saying this is how it will go down, but it explains how they're going to defy time, because what you find in dreams, especially a dream that you're lucid in, and you can actually become the architect and control it, you can change the perception of time for those who are in this new dream state of the metaverse. So, because you don't have, of course, the vehicle of entropy, your vessel, nor do you have the constraints of the macrocosmic entropy, which is, of course, the entropy of the universe and so on and so forth, because you yourself are affecting and distorting the perception of time within your own dream state, right? This digital dream state, let's just call it that. So if the black hole is the universe dreaming of its own dissolution, right, then of course that retrocausally provides impetus for life. Then what they're doing is they're trying to actually establish the mirror of that in I guess, a sort of grand cosmic sense, right? So everything they're doing, all of the inverse, the inversion, all of the conflagration, the reason, Kabbalah talks about this eschatology where Jerusalem will be made the scapegoat and so on and so forth, is fundamentally, right, they want to destroy this world. So that firstly, it provides us the political impetus to join whatever dream state they may have on the horizon, or to merely be the golems that maintain the data centers, so they can enjoy their own dream state. Or um, it's to it's well, there is no or, but the idea. This is what I wrote here. So if the dream can be made to be a playground, right, an energetic pluripotency, then in dreams we fall into a world where potential is limitless. Of course, the eye is fragmented into perspective, subconscious projections, right? Which, of course, each subconscious projection is unaware of the other one, and they all believe that they're differentiated, right? Um, so the dream is the discharge of the tension between what we thought we were, the eye, and what we actually are, the pleroma. So in this nested recursion of the dream, the Shemyaza, or in this case, the demiurge or the architects of this, whom stares at the heavens and seeks to materialize the bridge through the tower of the manifested Holy Spirit using bricks, the tower itself, right, and not the natural stones. Effectively, he realizes that why should I go through the physical, the arduous process of physically building the tower when I could build the technology which itself creates an almost like a wormhole into another cascading dream state, right? And in there I can affect time in such a way that I can bypass time that I can distort my perception of time, thus effectively be immortal without life granted, right? This is immortality without life as we know it. And in that state, they become the new architect. They become the new god. They create the new Garden of Eden. They become like the mysterious stranger himself, right? He can be whatever he wants to be because the void is his own dream. The idea is within the mysterious the adventures of Mark Twain, that illustration, just the cartoon, is that Satan, the adversary, is the adversary because he's not adversarial to the beings in his own world, because the beings in his own world are projections of his own unconscious dream, right? Of which he cascaded into to almost escape time within the other state he was in, the other dream state, right? The other material, his material world that he was bound to. So thus, he's adversarial to himself, and this ties in with the Geist and what Ludwig Klages was mentioning. So that idea that the Geist, the intellect, or the inframing of reality itself, is adversarial to the soul, because fundamentally the Geist will always seek to not necessarily devour the soul. It seeks to sequester it by trying to run from it further and further into the forest of delusion. So that this is the idea that you're seeing metaphysically within all of this, is that essentially it it basically informs everything we're seeing, why gods come into being, why creators come into being, and deconstruct themselves to thus establish the world, and then that world reconstructs God by technological means to then escape into another dream state in which they try and distort time so they can escape the bounds of time and the entropic effect of it, and then so on and so forth ad infinitum, you know? So you get further and further away from the soul. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
By the way, guys, I've finished dinner, so I can jump in again.
Oh, great, right. Well, do you want to go back to the Zeal? How long
No,
have you
no,
got? Yeah.
don't worry about that. Just a quick thing to say is that another way, because this is all perception manipulation, as you were talking about. Basically, it's the perception that changes, not time itself, and not biology itself, and etc. And so, one of the ways to perceive, for example, um, conscious reincarnation. Okay, one of the ways to do that is to be able to indoctrinate fully a child with the personality, the records of a personality that you want to live on. What happens then is that child has to be emptied of their own ego, right? And then indoctrinated with, you are this, you behave that, you are, you were once this guy or woman or whatever, and you do this and you do that and you have this and you have that, and that surrounds, if this surrounds the child entirely, while at the same time emptying out the ego, you disrupt the connection between the mind character and the ego, and the mind character is programmed to be the personality that you desire to be reincarnated. Do you understand what I'm saying? And of course, if you extend this into the speed at which information travels with digital means, of course you speed up the process much further. I mean, one of the things that you have seen excuse me, going on also in society is the introduction of new digitalized um, technologies into the schooling, right, of children, of course, with very different um, objectives than the one I said, but that can be used as a testing ground for, the acceleration of a quote unquote conscious reincarnation, which isn't, right? Basically, what you do is you empty. Imagine that, people talk about MK Ultra, right? But MK Ultra, which is basically trauma-based mind control, right? What that is done at the massive level. It is done on the masses. MK Ultra is marketing ultra, right? Therefore, the MK, it's not mind control, it's marketing. It is to empty out who you are and make you into, for example, the personality of a consumer, right? So that you have interests and needs for the things that make up your worldview, right? Now, this is on a mass level. Now, imagine this on a focused individual level. You empty out, make someone's psyche into more or less an empty shell, if you can imagine it, right? Without a connection to an ego, with a fully destroyed mind character and therefore programmable. And then you indoctrinate with everything you have about the personality that you want to reincarnate. And then you can have, whatever, you know, real or created historical figure reincarnated. So, in that sense, you make of that body an avatar for a program to run as if it was a reincarnation. I don't know if I made myself
Oh,
clear
no,
about that.
absolutely. And again, I think this, it really all ties around like what you were mentioning, Armin, the perception, you know? So it's another thing that relates to the idea of hyper reality, right? So hyper reality is there too. And there's actually, to get back to this, I actually, just to mention this, so the notion that we see, for example, in yeah, so this is for both of you guys, right? And just to finish off a couple of other questions, because I'll get in the comments that we haven't spoken about superheroes. So this sort of ties in with what we're mentioning, right? And the idea of perceptuality. Baudrillard mentioned that the simulacrum is never that which conceals the truth. It is the truth which conceals that there is none. The simulacrum is true. So the idea is that fundamentally, the perceptual indoctrination, it's not to effectively distort the truth. It's to so sequester the truth that under under the nonsense of the indoctrination, right, where one is so bereft of anything else that all they have to cling to is what they perceive to be true, which is, of course, the indoctrination. So you basically make man an island in that sense, and then you provide him the island by which he clings to as a sort of life jacket of hope. And this is what you see, for example, with nationalism, or of course, it's the inverse reflection of that, which is that the nationalist, the primary vehicle, and this is the primary vehicle that the Caesar figure uses as well, Armin, that everything is terrible. We are losing the integrity of our world. We are losing everything. Look how terrible everything is, and it's in a state of decay. We need revivification, a resurgence. Therefore, what you're basically inculcating in the mind is a mind character that believes that they are completely bereft of any hope, and thus, when you make man an island, and then you give him if you make man adrift in the sea, if you will, as a sort of castaway, and you give him an island, right? And that's analogous with for example, Trump or any Caesar figure or any sort of a controlled opposition agent, that they will cling to that because it's the only thing that permits them the respite of hope. So you have that too. But here's something I want to ask regarding that, right? So in Kino's journey, the last survivor believes he has a perfect system while sitting in ruins. In the Western obsession with the superhero mythology, our way of saying essentially, as I stated, we have the perfect culture, right? It's propagandistic. But that's all the while our actual organic communities are in total decay. So, do you believe we're almost living in a sort of Orwellian contrast where the newspaper, because of the Ministry of Truth, if you will, is telling us everything is great, all the while, you know, the reality itself is like an apophatic state, a gas, the literal idol of gaslighting. It is the state of a ruin. So what do you guys think about that
Yeah.
contrast there?
In this case, we are in, when we described in the past, we talked about historical resets and the application of new blueprints. We are now in one such. A reset is not a physical cataclysm like, people can imagine the deluge or the earthquake, that, a comet. No, it's not that. A reset is you clear out the past and you indoctrinate, you introduce a new blueprint ready to continue as if it had, because the blueprint has a past that is written in. It's not the past you have, right? But it has a past there written in, that gives you a resemblance of roots or whatever you want to call it, right? And so at this moment in time, you are witnessing the reset in the sense of there's a clearing of a fake past for the introduction of a new fake past. You understand? And that's why we shouldn't cling to any of the pasts. Because all of the pasts will always will always manipulate us to point towards a certain specified or specific future, right? Even that guy that video, I think it was Flight of Heroes, said that when he was discussing AI or something like that, he said that we have a story based on our past, but that shouldn't dictate what we can do in the future, right? And that is actually correct, in the sense that it's not because you replace, okay, now, it wasn't the Big Bang, it was aliens that made us, that made the world, and that made us, whatever bullshit that, right? It's still BS, right? You replace one fake past with another, but one future is if you imagine that you come from a Big Bang and an evolution, slowly through millions of years. Another future is when you come from the aliens made me, right? And I'm not saying that is the past that will be introduced, but as or simulationism, which I think will be key to all this. Simulationism will probably be introduced into, saying that we have always lived in a simulation, an actual computer simulation, and there are plenty of instances of media programming towards that. So we are living, and that's why it looks so strange, and it looks like that guy in Kino's Journey that you were mentioning. The the guy that said we've developed the perfect system, and he was sitting alone in ruins, right? It is because we are living in ruins of this fake past, with a new fake past ready-made to be introduced. And with it comes, of course, a fake future, because if you control the past, you control where you're directed, where you're going to look ahead, right? So, yeah, I know it's really strange times, but what I would really reiterate, just in closing, sorry for taking so long, is the fact that you discover that this is false doesn't mean that the opposite in its binary is true. If what's ahead of you is false, doesn't mean that what's behind you is true. They can both be false. And in this case, I absolutely think they are. The truth cannot be found in the temporality of things. The truth is found within and in the relationship that you have individually with yourself and with the world that is actually there, not the imagined perceived world. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Absolutely on point, yeah. Yeah, well, this even ties in with the occult metaphysics as well, right? That both the alpha and the omega are reflections of one another. So fundamentally, like what you said, it doesn't necessarily mean that the theme park you're trying to get away from, excuse me, the theme park you're going to, uh, of course, they're enticing you in with stating, well, we're not like the other theme park, that was dilapidated. Join this theme park. This is a better theme park. Look, new rides and all of that, of course. Um, but both of them are susceptible to rust and oxidation. What are your opinions upon that, Azil? The idea that everything is sort of, it appears that the liberal order or the perfect culture is collapsing. Uh, all the while, it's almost like the superhero mythos itself is almost an extolling from the public itself that we have the perfect culture. So it's this sort of this division, this lack of marrying between that of the actual reality that we see on the ground and of course the Hollywood reality, the hyper reality.
He fell asleep with my
I've
monologue. Sorry about that.
no, he's I've sent him a few links. He's probably reading that. Um,
Oh yeah, I'm diving into Yeats there and the Blavatsky and the Damon. Sorry, did you put a question my way
yeah,
there?
yes, I did.
Sorry.
So this idea that, for example, we see the sort of decay of the liberal order,
Yeah.
and with the decay of the liberal order, you're seeing right at the same. So all around us is this decay. It's this clearly the liberal order isn't working, but yet the superhero mythology is almost an extolling by this decaying culture that in fact they do have a perfect culture. So it's almost like this weird, again, it's apophatic, right? It doesn't necessarily marry up with reality, right? So what they're stating and what we're seeing come from Hollywood is a hyper reality. It's a
Mm.
distortion of reality. Do you have any comments upon that?
Well, I don't think there is a reality anymore, and I think the hyper reality is the graveyard of reality, and the bones and the shallow graves of the real are contained in the hyper reality, and they've murdered it in the mass consciousness. They've murdered the real, and you know they've done a serial killer on reality, and they've murdered it piece by piece by piece until it was in pieces, as it were. And so I kind of think that's where we're at. There's this sense, I have it myself, my personal own self. I have this strange relationship now with the world around me. I have this kind of. You said it yourself best one time. You put it simply, Silas. I'm just checking that. Let me check something here. Sorry. Yeah, I'm still on here. You said that you took a walk up in the Highlands or somewhere in Scotland, and you were walking up to the old. There was a cairn or a
Oh
standing
yeah.
stone or some aspect in the landscape that at a certain point in time it connected you back into the mythos, into the spirit of the land, as it were, and into the past, and you felt this connection. But then you went up in a recent time and you couldn't resonate with it. Like it was hollow, and you felt a disconnect, and you felt something had been severed. And that's the feeling I have with the world around me, essentially, for for better or worse at the present time. And I think what I'm actually picking up on is this death of reality. That there's you're into the synthetic hyper real, and somehow again it is an act of sorcery, and it relates in a sense to the same type of mechanism that Flight of Eros mentioned with I forget the exact term he used. Was this it was something that we had mistakenly perhaps picked up on as a kind of seeding into the psyche. But what he said it was you're priming reality or hastening reality to happen, accelerating certain aspects of not reality but certain aspects of what you want to happen by placing them in the consciousness, in the mass consciousness. So similarly, the hyperreal is a sort of demonic presence in a sense, if you will, because the more you encounter it, the more it inhabits you, and the more it inhabits you, the more it displaces.
Yeah.
It displaces your relationship with reality in the pure sense, and this displacement happens gradually, sort of over time. And the society now has had its relationship with reality completely displaced, I would suggest, and this sort of possession, if you will, has taken place, where now you have this formal relationship. You're now, we'll say, two phases. One is the displacement, and secondly, then the later, more acute phase is the inhabiting, or the possession, as it were. And the full inhabiting of the hyperreal in the consciousness is now the case in the world around us and in people's relationship with that world. So when real events happen, ironically, then actual real events, they will seem like aberrations. They'll seem like they don't fit, and they'll seem like they'll have a kind of high strangeness associated with them. So there'll be a
Yes.
complete inversion. There'll be a complete inversion. Like the stuff that's fake will seem real, and the stuff that's real will seem fake, or not even just fake. It'll seem weird, and it'll seem sort of has this uncanny, ungeheimlich. It'll be like, it'll have this kind of strange, abstract
And
kind of feel about it.
that's where simulationism steps in, because if you are made to perceive, to believe that your perception of reality is actually a computer simulation, now imagine what that does to your observations, right? Everything is simulated, therefore there's no you even, right? There's nothing.
Yeah, well, that's a critical point. It's like if your perception of reality is so skewed, what about your perception of yourself? That's also
Right.
So the next annihilation is the annihilation of the self. If you've annihilated reality and replace it with a kind of hyper fake reality, the next murder is the self murder. And I think that's where kind of why the Nick Rayner case is relevant, not necessarily because it's about anything to do with the individual's concern, but I think it resonates against what we're discussing here. The final murder, like the murder of the mother and father,
Yeah.
is probably the penultimate aberration before the murder of the self.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it's the
First, yeah,
it's the Frankensteinian child, isn't it? Sorry, continue
yeah,
your point.
yeah. No, it's just that it's like before the suicide, you kill mom and dad. You kill what created you, then you kill you, and that ties in kind of what you're saying earlier on, Silas, about this. This is the final. You mentioned Harari kind of talks about this. He hints at it. We'll pursue this even if it kills us. He's hinting at this. Like there's a suicidal impulse, which they view as a rebirth. But in any right thinking mind, it would be a suicide. But they're looking at it as a sort of a rebirth, as I understand it.
Exactly.
Or
But well,
yeah.
sorry, I didn't mean to
No.
interject.
That's. I
You're
mean, you
totally
went
on
into it
point there.
in so much depth there, Silas, earlier on, that I think you delineated. There's nothing else that can be said on the matter. Really, you completely knocked the ball out of the park. Like you just into discussing how how this happens, really. So I'm only giving it a very simplified version of it, but that's my
Oh no,
kind of understanding.
hey, I'm here because I basically just want to ask you guys questions, and I want to hear your points of view as well. But some of these topics are so special. See, when we go into the occult or that, I'm like, I'm like a child entering a sweet shop because I really like talking about these things. But I ultimately I want to hear your guys' thoughts, but there's something really interesting with the Rob Reiner thing as well. We were talking about the 9-year cycle. Well,
Mm,
it's between being Charlie and then actually being Charlie in
mm,
the physical sense, right? So this sort of inversion of the hyper reality itself, where it became actual reality, or who knows, maybe another depth to the hyper reality if it didn't exist. But
yeah.
um, it actually mirrors also another thing with the 9 steps utilized to reach the Master of the Temple grade in several Rosicrucian systems. In Rosicrucianism, if you look at Amorc, which Amorc is the ancient mystical order of the Rosicrucis, or the Rosy Cross, that's the acronym. That also has, by the way, Amor in it. So the Amorites, the bull calf of the sun god, the son of the sun, effectively. The same idea that we see in Tur Balali, the tower of the son of the calf, or the son of the sun. Um, so the idea, and fundamentally as well, what you see with that Amorc is its headquarters, I think, is in Brazil. There's a Brazilian headquarters somewhere anyway, or it's in America. It might be in North America. And it's interesting, pardon me, it's interesting because it's based on the Temple of Aten. It's almost a recreation of the Temple of Aten. It even has Aten and Nefertiti on the front. And also as well, the Rosicrucian emblem is very similar. On that headquarters is very similar to
Mm,
the Aten disc
mm.
with the 14 rays coming out and all of this. So it's
Well,
you also see the 14 levels on the reverse of the Great Seal. So.
let me put an idea towards you, right? And this has to do with kind of chaos magic and actual sorcery, as it were, and the manipulation of reality, really, magic, perhaps. And the idea is this, like, that just say, for example, the power structure have an objective. To really simplify things, they have an objective, somewhere they're trying to go toward. And what I want to talk about here a little bit is ritual. Okay, so within the ritual, you're focusing the will uh, through physical activity and within perhaps a joint endeavor, be it a group or maybe in society. And ritual, in the sense, might even take the place of, like, as we would call it, a psyop, a psychological operation, or a mass event of some description, which has been completely synthetically manufactured, and it's designed to harness energy, as it were, to propel energy, to help propel things in a given direction to achieve the objective, as I said at the start of the point, right? Now, this is what I want to put to you.
Mhm.
I want to put this idea to you. For every 99 of these synthetic, organized psyops, shall we say, magic rituals that you have actually put together, you put them together through your own people, through your own systems, mechanisms, whatever it will be. For every 99 of them that you do, one will begin to occur naturally in reality, all by itself, exactly moving towards your objective. And this is what I think. There's a synthetic, sorry, there's a synthesis between what is manufactured and what is actually real. And I think the Rainer thing, and I'm throwing this out, is a sort of is an example of this. It's a perfect uh, thing that has happened absolutely naturally, organically, but it is completely tying in with the objective, the power structure objective, the golden dawn, as it were. And you know, what's the word, patricide? What do you call it, Silas, where you kill your parents?
Plebiscite.
parasite. This parasite is an actual resonant, aligned event that has happened naturally, but it is aligned exactly with the trajectory of the overall
Yeah.
objective. And this
Yes.
is this is this is sorcery. This is sorcery actually at work, because
Oh yeah.
these endeavor. What you have, this answers kind of an earlier question. If you go back to your 90, if reality is comprised, we'd say, of 100 components, and if you can manipulate 99 of them, manufacture 99 of them components, but you're not God, right? You cannot control everything. However, because of this resonance and this chaos magic aspect, the remaining one out of 100, remember, you control the other 99, the remaining one
Mhm.
that is outside your control will magically resonate in a frequency type manner, in harmony with all your endeavors, all your other ritualistic goings on. So that's what I think is happening. That's why we see sometimes we will see events that are not controlled, but will
Mhm.
be exactly in line um,
Yeah, yes, because
with
if
the
you have the
objective.
majority control of reality and the various
Yeah,
messaging that's put out into reality, then effectively, yes, absolutely. Another thing to mention is both the digital world and the telecommunicative hyperrealities, basically those hyperrealities created by media in whatever
yeah,
form, they are basically the perfect crime, because they're the perfect crime because reality is being silently murdered through them. So, um,
yeah.
as I forget the individual that mentioned it, but oh yeah, Byung Chul Han in the Burnout Society, he mentions that the late modern achievement subject is not a labourer, but a zombie of fitness and performance. It is a life that has become purely biological, a life that is undead, stripped of all narrative meaning. And so you base it, they're persisting afterwards, after this, reality has been silently murdered in an atemporal oblivion, is a sort of zombified, hyper normalized husk of a last man, basically mere relics in a hyper real void of suspended disbelief. So the idea is that what, yeah, absolutely. If you have the majority control of reality, informationally speaking, then eventually you're going to create copycats, right? That was something they were trying to create with the whole school shooting events,
Mm.
in the 2010s and things, right? But here's one last question I want to pose to both of you. And yeah, it's been fascinating. And we're now at 3 hours and 30. But this is the final question, right? And we'll close it off here, and then we'll pick this up later on. Um, so Leotard, uh, Jean Francois Lyotard, I believe his name was, he discussed the disillusion of the hero. So he stated, quote, "The narrative function is losing its functors, its great hero, its great dangers, its great voyages, its great goal. It is being dispersed in clouds of narrative language elements," unquote. So what you're seeing here is Lyotard is speaking of narratives being broken into clouds of language elements. So does this mean that the cinematic universe represents the death of the great journey, and moreover, are we witnessing, like what we see, for example, this sort of journey that we're seeing from that of actual narrative, actual morals to content and Easter eggs, and that creating the narrative arc? And are we also, is this the same sort of thing we're witnessing with the shift from mythology, which has a goal, a moral, and a destination, to lore, which is just an endless collection of data points for a consumer tribe to memorize and map? What are your guys' opinions on that? And then after that, we'll close off this discussion.
Yeah, it is
6 mark.
absolutely the. Sorry.
Don't all go at
Sorry,
once.
yeah.
You go, Armin, and then you jump in, Zio. Just hold the thought.
So
Go on, Armunn.
you're absolutely, or that guy is absolutely right. It is the death of, this there's a certain uh, worshipful. Worship is not the correct, but a veneration that is implicit with life, right? With being alive, and you see this in animals too. It's a certain visceral joy of existing as you are, within the parameters that you are, right? And when that is removed, of course, everything from, like I said before, the people you admire that would be your heroes, to even your interactions with reality itself, then you lose yourself, like Zeal was pointing out. All of that is destroyed. So entirely agree, and I think that although it is on the verge, you know, um, we must also understand that although we are in a privileged timing here, witnessing this happen real time, and I mean, sometimes it feels like we're in a, some sort of cheap play, like I feel like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern in that movie. Um, it is also a fantastic opportunity that none of our relatives ever had. Parents, grandparents, so on. They've never had this opportunity to compare, to understand how led they were being, right? To understand how unreal the foundations of their beliefs were shown to be. And so this is, although, like I said, we are on the verge of something, that could potentially be, the death of the self. It is also an opportunity, and I don't think that it's by accident that we meet in these forums to discuss, and
Mm.
that we've also met in person, not you Zeal yet, but hopefully in the future. Because that is that is the collateral of this whole thing. It's that we eventually find ourselves because the self was trying to be killed, right?
Mm.
But oh yeah, that would be my closing statement. I hope I was able to answer your question, Salas.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Please, Zeal.
Well, but this might my final, and it's kind of more piggybacking off what Armin just said rather than your actual question. So feel free to reposition me vis-a-vis the original question, Silas. But more coming off what Armin says, like the 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 good news in all this is like we can engage in the sorcery too, and to do that is we should to use, first of all, to assert ourselves as an individual, to find one's own mind, as it were, and one's own self, and then one's own will, with a view to, because we can reach into this chaos and create. Where that's the sort of good news. If you have that creative instinct, because there's such a flurry of broken pieces, we're in a whirlwind, we're in the eye of a storm, and there's bits and pieces of broken items of the fragmented reality whirling around us at hundreds of miles an hour in the dark wind. But because we have an innate creative capacity, we too can become sorcerers, and kind of reach into those broken whirling pieces and sort of fabricate our own position in this new broken reality. Now the challenge is, however, is to find, and I speak to myself as well as perhaps many more who can resonate with this point. The challenge is to find that we can empower ourselves to do this, because what I feel we must be wary of is apathy, and I speak to myself, because at the same time as it affords great opportunity, as Armin says, it also stuns. It has the capacity to stun us and to make us feel weak or lost. And I think it's to reach in and find that creative instinct, and I say creative in the widest, loosest possible term, to fabricate, maybe first of all the self, to excavate the self, do an archaeological dig and find out, well, who really am I, or was I, before all this psychological warfare, propaganda, inculcation, brainwashing, exposure to mass media, exposure to religion, society, nation, concepts of race, concepts of history, all of these layers that are hoisted on me, my name, all of which, my own concept of self. If I can excavate something pure underneath all of that, I have a starting point. I have found something I can call me. And once I've found that position, then I can begin to look out into this whirlwind and start to create. But as I said, the challenge is to find the courage and to find the will and the electricity within, the lightning bolt to do that. That, I think, is the challenge.
Absolutely. I absolutely resonate with those sentiments. And so just to close this out, guys, I guess with a few quotes and a little bit of the horizon, a little bit of opinions on the horizon of spectacle that we've covered thus far, and also the other assortment of topics that we got onto. So, quote: Disneyland is presented as imagery in order to make us believe that the rest is real, unquote, as Baudrillard stated. So, in summary, the transition from organic myth to the superhero spectacle marks a pivotal shift in the human experience, the outsourcing of the soul to the franchise. As we have discussed, these movies function as a simulation of meaning for a population that has been stripped of its traditional markers of identity, kinship, soil, local mythology, and faith. The spectacle has successfully mediated our social relations through images, leaving us in a state of hyper-real and a hyper-normalized passivity. The question that remains for us is whether a population nurtured on such thin, artificial soil can ever reclaim a narrative that is truly their own, or if we are destined to live out the remainder of history as spectators to a manufactured heroism that requires nothing of us but our attention and our capital. And Guy Debord stated, quote, the spectator's consciousness, imprisoned in a flattened universe, bound by the screen of the spectacle, behind which life has been deported, knows only the fictional speakers who unilaterally surround him with their commodities. The spectacle is not a collection of images, but a social relation among people, mediated by images, unquote. And with that, guys, I do thank you for joining me. That was quite a tour de force. 3 hours and 37 minutes. Absolutely
And anyone
fascinating,
who's listening
gentlemen.
to all that, God bless you. God bless you.
Well, it was. In the meantime, I had dinner and also.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've been living your life in between. It's yeah, it's like yeah. Right,
Okay,
guys.
gentlemen. Great to talk to you all. God bless. Armunn, great
Excellent.
to chat to you. Hopefully get to chat again soon.
Yeah,
Absolutely, man.
likewise, man. Excellent. Thank you.
Good night.
Take
Good
it
night,
easy.
all.
Bye.
Good night,
Bye.
all. Take care. Good night.